you. Good afternoon. Welcome to this special council meeting to deal with the budget of the Township of Selwyn, Thursday, February the 6th, 2025. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mishi, Sagag, and Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the First Peoples for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor those teachings. Please observe a moment of silence so the council staff and members of the public can quietly reflect on our duty to the community that we are trying to serve. Thank you. Members of the public, staff, presenters, and members of council, please be advised that meetings are broadcast and recorded and made available on the internet. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof? Seeing none, please note that in the minutes. Were there any questions that came forward for question period, Madam Clerk?
No questions.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to the officers and staff reports. And first, we're going to hear from Robert Kelly with regards to the planning fee update report. Robert.
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Before you is my planning application fee increase report. It is the last step of proposed phase-in that began in 2021. As Council will recall, a report came in front of you last year for our third phase-in. The information contained in here shows that this proposed increase will continue to drive our revenue closer to the 66% recovery for application services. And we may still have a significant gap as we see trends returning to our typical 5-year average. So we should see improvements there, but I don't think we'll be at our target level. And if you had any specific questions with regard to the phase-in that is attached or the fees, I'd be more than happy to take those questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for Robert? Deputy Mayor Black.
Thank you, Mayor Senes. Thanks for the report, Robert's good report. The fee comparison schedule that you provided is excellent as well. There seems to be a fair bit of variability between the municipalities on what they charge. Sorry, I can't see it. You know, you look at amended applications, some are charging nothing, we are charging. And things happen the opposite way. There's many more that are higher. So I'm just surprised that there's not a little bit more uniformity and particularly, you know, ones within the county even that's you know, that's not part of it. So there's a lot of variability obviously between the different municipalities, and I'm not sure whether I think our report is done through a consultant, and those numbers have come to us originally through a consultant, and we're building on those. But is there an ability from a more regional perspective to have rates that are more similar, so developers and builders kind of know what the expectation is as far as those fees?
Through you, Mayor Senes, I believe the original consulting report outlined the target for where the fee phase-in was going, and then the implementation and the proposed layout of the fees was initiated by my predecessor. And I've stepped in, obviously, since taking over the role and worked forward with the information and the established fees that we had. And there has been a minor amendment along the way to sort of identify and work with our application volumes. But I think the volume of different types of applications is significantly different among the different municipalities. And we've got to work to what our strengths are and take in more revenue in the areas that we are stronger. And I don't know that it would be possible. And some of our local lower tiers use, as we do, use the county planning department for some of our applications as the lead, And then in some cases, we're the lead. So to find that right mix, I'm not sure that would be possible from our perspective.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Robert? Seeing none, we have a recommendation before us. Can I have someone move what's in front of us? Counselor Henry, seconded by Counselor Coolus, all in favor. That is carried. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to our fire chief, Book Jopling, and you have a report with regards to drying equipment bunker gear.
All right, through you, Mayor Sennis. So in front of you is we're asking for more money again.
Imagine that, imagine that.
Hell surprise.
So as you know, we did get not our full grant. We were told that, roughly 10,000 per fire hall. So when it come down to what it come down to is there was a lot of fire departments put in for the grant, which is a good thing. So when it come back, it worked out to about 23 and change, or 83 and change per each hall. So what that come back down to is as we put in respiratory protection, which is our fit testing, it's going to be good. We'll be able to do that ourselves instead of, waiting for everybody else from Peterborough. We put in for bunker gear cleaning and a drying system and storage lockers, which would be update hall 1 and a couple of the others. So what we didn't get was the drying cabinet, and it's part and parcel with our bunker gear with the extraction unit. So we do have dryers in the hall, but they're mainly for, the wetsuits and whatnot. And they're 3 and 4 days drying, even if we put a set of bunker gear on it. So without this dryer, we can wash them, but we're not getting them back into service as fast as we like to get the bunker gear. Cause as we don't have an extra set for everybody. And when ours does go out, it's 3 and 4 days coming back. And this way, at least, unless it's really dirty and it needs professional washing, if firefighters, it's sweaty and whatnot, they can go in and wash their own gear now. And then without this dryer, which can dry in 4 to 6 hours, will be 3 and 4 days. So what we're asking is if we can, possibly get this purchased at the same time we get this washer machine and get things back. So we can speed up firefighters, make sure they have the bunker gear and for another call and whatnot. So again, too, not every piece needs to go to professional wash. And this way we can look after our own people and make sure things are clean. So this is where this is coming from, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so, and this would be coming out of the capital budget. Correct, yeah. All right, any questions for Gord? Deputy Mayor Black.
Thank you, through Mayor Sennis. Thanks, Gord. I think this is a fantastic idea. It's going to save us some money, obviously, down the road with external cleaning and how long will it take before we can get the equipment in and up and running? I know it's takes time and then.
Well, right now we actually have the respiratory
Right.
equipment right now.
Yeah.
So everything else has been ordered other than the cabinet dryer, and I think we can have it in. So with this 25% tariff, and then hopefully now that they've set it off another month, the
Get
sooner we
across
can
the
get this
board.
going, the better. So,
Yeah. So in the next couple of months, you should be operational.
uh,
Right.
So a lot of the departments that it did put in for the grant actually went for very similar products, because it really ties into the cancer prevention as well.
Right.
So even the manufacturer actually manufactured in Peterborough, which is great.
Oh.
At the products, but there's a lot of up in the air and how, because they have a huge demand at this time as to when we'd actually get the product. That's kind of the delay.
hopefully we're on the top of the list.
Counselor Coolus?
Thank you, through you. I was just a question about the grant. Is it just a one-time grant, or have they decided to roll it
Well,
out over multiple?
There was $30 million put out, and it's supposed to be over a 3-year period. So I'm thinking it's the 10 million every year. So, and this was specific to what, the fire prevention of, cancers and that. So the next 10 million be this year. I'm not sure where that goes or what it is, or if it's even going to be there. So again, too, with things changing in the world as fast as they have in the last couple of months, so it's, we're all kind of in the air right now, so,
Follow up.
yeah.
Through you, thanks. I just wanna, when we went to AMO last year and we talked to the fire marshal and the solicitor general, they didn't know. Right? And so I just wanted to follow up, but I'll put a pin in that because I'm gonna go to AMO again this year. I know colleagues are too, so potentially another delegation.
You know, I would think they'd still stay along the same plan as they have for, you know, cancer prevention and stuff like that, because there's a lot of fire halls that don't have. They're on a work like us. We're not nowhere near close to being up to snuff. And, you know, if you want Ministry of Labor, they are going to start looking at this a little more closely, you know, with WSIB. There's cancer firefighters is not a good thing, right? So they're looking to nip that in the bud as much as they can.
Thank you.
Councillor Boyka.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Sennis. Yeah, thank you. I support this as well. My question, maybe through you or to Lane, I'm not sure, is obviously this is going to make things more efficient, which is great.
We're
But
hoping,
is,
yes.
yeah, but is there a cost savings, a projected, has there been a projected savings of having this equipment there as opposed to doing it the old way that we used to do it? Is there a projected savings? Is there a number?
Through you, Mayor. Yeah, there will be. It costs about $54 a suit right now to send it out. Okay, says it, the red,
Yeah.
is that better? I'll just get closer to it.
Where's
Uh,
this push?
You know, it's on. So there will be a savings. It's not one that you could specifically be pin just right down because it depends on the number of firefighters. And maybe 2 firefighters will look after cleaning gear for 4 or 5 other firefighters, right? So, but there will be a saving definitely in shipping alone because where it's going right now is quite far away. There'll always be a component where it has to be shipped. If we have a big incident, we can't clean it all and we need to get it back. So we get back in service. But the great part about this is we get a grass fire or we get something where they just get their bunker pants dirty or maybe a sleeve. We're not bagging this gear up and shipping it away, getting it clean, and bring it back. They'll be able to actually get into the hall, get that clean. So there will be savings for sure.
Okay, so I guess we look at the end of next year and look at,
Yeah.
then we'll have comparator or real comparator. Okay, thank you.
All right, seeing no other questions, we have a recommendation before us. Who would like to move it? Moved by Deputy Mayor Black, seconded by Councillor Boyko. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And now we're moving on to the main event with Lane Vance.
Thank you, Mayor. And thanks to council for once again holding a special meeting to consider next steps on our process. Just as we get the presentation fired up here, just some housekeeping issues. So the presentation will be in the same order as the binder that was distributed on the 27th. And as normal, as we work through the presentation, hoping that there'll be some questions. I definitely will have some additional comments and then pause for questions as we go. We've got the management team here for any other clarification. And hopefully it'll be as interactive as other years. My clicker's not working. Okay, so just some opening comments on where we are at this point. So with respect to 2024 and finishing up the year, as outlined in the document, we did have our arena deficits. We are getting really close to break even on some of our arenas. We had a parks deficit this year as well because of some of the challenges with respect to third-party contracts, the porta potties and some of the issues with tree maintenance. But those will be cleared in the 2025 budget with the transfer. There's some capital items, and that's been updated in the narrative that's included there that are carrying over. Maybe the dollar value is a little bit different than what it was in November. This budget includes the capital fire levy that was introduced at the capital budget meeting. And all of that basically comes through for a net tax levy of 4.63% initial. And then when we add in the capital levy, it goes to 6.54%. So that's kind of a high level, and that's what's included in my cover report that's attached there. And then there are a series of recommendations that come out of that as well. Just want to make sure, I don't know if I have that in my notes or not, but I think I had sent that out just to clarify that there is one section in the recommendation that it doesn't have a specific bearing on the budget, but we do need council support to submit a grant application. So that doesn't have any bearing on any other parts of the recommendation or on the budget itself, but it's just got included in there because we do need that level of support. So yeah, the goal is definitely of the presentation is just to have a good discussion. My goal, of course, is adoption of the recommendation, but there's definitely a lot of information in here. And so when we've got a budget with police, it's about $26.5 million overall. And staff have been to varying degrees working on or living the budget since about October. So there's a lot of information in here for sure, but that's why the management team's here today to move things forward. A reminder just about where we are in the budget cycle. Working our way down through we've reviewed our preliminary year ends. We're still making audit adjustments. It's surprising to me always how long it takes for the suppliers and the vendors to get their invoices in at the end of the year. But that's still coming through. But definitely a lot of dialogue, a lot of debate to get to this juncture. And as you can see from the slide, we're getting close to the finish line for this budget. As noted in other years, assessment really is one of our key factors. We've got a limited number of areas where we can generate revenues, and assessment's a key one. I'll work through a few slides here to go through some of our revenue sources, and assessment's really that key driver for tax rate. Our CVA, of course, current value assessment still frozen at the 2016 values. Our growth was fairly good last year at 1.44% real growth. A large component of that was our residential class, which is really no surprise. Residential class comprises about 91% of our overall assessment base. And then when you include farmland into that, it's up closer to 95%. So that's why we spend a lot of time at the budget taking a look at the impact on the residents or residential tax rate.
I have a question for you.
Mhm.
Is impact pretty much up to date with us with what's going on, or is there a lag?
Yeah, no, they MPAC, especially the local contacts here, are very responsive. And so we meet on a quarterly basis. They review our stats. MPAC actually outlines goals for assessment, which is at a very high level. But when we start to get to the third quarter and we have discussions, then that's when Erica, Michelle, and I would point out issues like, for instance, your own subdivision up in the Lilacs and areas like that, where if we know there's been a lot of growth and a lot of builds, then we draw that to their attention and make sure that they're in. And even if they can't get full assessment, to try to get partial assessment. So I can say in the last, I would think 5 years at least, real concerted effort to get as much assessment as they can and try to get that on that year-end goal. Okay, so on to, as we mentioned, our assessment yields taxes. We're really fortunate that we have received a variety of provincial and federal grants. The narrative definitely goes through a lot of detail there on the different grants. And I would say we've continued to receive solid financial support from the province. And I'll go through some of that in a little bit more detail. Two of our biggies, and with respect to provincial grants, they're substantial and they're unconditional, is the UMF grant. So we did see a nice increase in that from 2024, about $52,000. So we're up to about 1.2 million for the UMF grant. The OC grant, which is geared a little bit more to asset management and infrastructure investments, we had a decrease there, roughly the same amount, but down to 258. And we've looked at these, even though they're an unconditional grant, as much as possible to take a look at one-time expenses or capital programs. We don't really rely on them because, as you can see, they do fluctuate quite a bit. On the federal side, nice increase there of about 24,000. That increase with respect to the Canada Community Building Fund, which used to be the AMO Gas Tax Fund. That's based on a per capita data, which is captured at a national level. And this year, Ontario's share went up, so that's great. And this is really the only stable source of funding that we receive from the federal government, and we have used that traditionally for road reconstruction. I would also draw council's attention to the grants awaiting announcement section. A lot of information in there for sure. There's just a ton of effort put into grant applications. It's spearheaded for the most part by corporate services, so Angie and her staff. And then any of the benefiting departments provide some of that data that needs to go through. But anybody who's ever put together a grant application knows that there's lots of bits and pieces. I would say where we've improved over the years is reaching out to the grant authorities and actually trying to get a better feel for where they're coming from. What is this grant really trying to achieve for the grantor? So if it's a provincial grant, what are you really trying to achieve with this grant? And of course, the different agencies that do have the grant or the different ministries, their goal is to give that money out and make sure that it meets the guidelines and then have a good return on it. A lot of effort that goes into it. Always trying to maximize our grants from different levels of government for sure. But we also need to be mindful that we quite often need to fund our share of it. So whether it's a third or 25% or something like that. Just recent successes, definitely we spoke about the fire grant and cancer prevention equipment. Our community emergency preparedness grant and our fixed generator, we're taking a look at that as well because we've been successful at that. So a lot of grants in there that are just kind of at that at the cusp. Of course, the recent election call, it's kind of put some of that kind of stuff on hold. So we'll see where we go with it. Great thing in recent years with grant applications is that a lot of it, even though you have to import it into a portal somehow, it is mostly word-based. And so we can use a lot of the different sections in the different grants. So, but definitely a lot of work from corporate services on that and appreciate that. So moving on over into the CAP 25 in November, and there are definitely a number of carryovers and continuations of some of the multi-year projects. And we still have a number of projects still underway, which are impacting the budget. And the narrative at this point highlights a couple of areas where capital programs have been clarified. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Sure. Yes.
A chance to look through our notes. Thanks. So just one question through you, Mayor. First part of the Ontario Municipal Partnership Grant, the transfer to fire and supporting arenas and support to successive management transitional costs in general government. Is that a separate reserve we have set up? I didn't think I could find it in the documents. Is it a separate reserve?
So the first question with respect to deficits, that's just what's carried forward from the year before. So
Okay.
that will be in the accumulated revenue section as a negative number essentially. That goes
Okay.
through. The succession management piece at $100,000, we set that up I think for 2 years maybe. This second year now, and that's a placeholder amount. So we're using a section of that in Department 5 for sure this year.
Okay.
And then the remainder is available for use of any other parts of the succession plan. So it doesn't, at the end, if it isn't fully utilized, it would go to the general government reserve.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, through you, just follow up. So that is used for if we need assistance with succession planning, outside consulting.
No,
How would that money be used?
yeah, so that's a great question. So as much as possible, we're trying to look at some of those positions that are changing over the next 5 years or so, and say that if we can, we try to have some overlap. So
Right.
rather than building into the budget 14 months of wage, we would have 12 months of FTEs, full-time equivalent, and then that overlap period, we would pull out of the funds to offset that.
Perfect. That makes sense. Complete sense. Follow up, Mayor. with respect to the grants awaiting announcement, student wage grant programs. How many students are we looking for this summer as far as, I'm sure they're used in Parks and Recreation, that sort of stuff? How many students are we looking for?
Yeah, I'll probably get to Andy or Tanya to take a run at that.
Certainly, the township applied through Canada Summer Jobs for 3 positions. One is for an administrative assistant for the office general,
Okay,
reporting to
yeah,
the clerk.
side, yeah.
And then we have 2 for the Parks and Recs department. One, I believe, is a grounds maintenance, and then facility attendant.
Is that consistent with past requests? Is it? Yeah.
We have applied for all 3 of those positions in the past, and we have applied for others as well.
Yeah, thank you. One last one. Thank you, New Mayor. The Natural Infrastructure Fund, the vegetative buffer in the Lakeville Campground. Supposed to be completed by March 31st, 24. Any word on announcements on that one?
No, I'm baffled by this one, to be honest with you. They haven't said no.
Okay,
They keep saying the request is pending. We follow up, I bet 3 or 4 times a year.
okay.
Um,
But it's still an active
it-
file as
it's
far as. they're
still
concerned?
active. It's just says pending. We've talked to people. As I said, I've never seen anything like this before in my life.
Yeah.
Anyway, maybe someday it'll get approved.
We can always hope.
Can always help. Thank you.
Okay. Wait,
Thank you. Oh, yeah, so over into capital, and the narrative highlights a couple of areas where programs have been clarified or carried over. We're at about 4.57 million when you include studies for this year. And then, of course, following today's meeting and some council decisions, I'll update that one page. It's the one that's on the 11/17 that I present at the capital budget, and I'll make sure that that gets over to council before the next council meeting. It would include things like the fire equipment and the grant, which is coming forward with respect to the generator and things like that. But I'll make sure, and that's all funded through either a grant or a reserve. I'll make sure that that gets over to council. I like that one in particular because on one page, even though it's a big page, it outlines our entire capital program. Pie chart just to visually show where the investments are being made in 2025. I think most folks would like to see that the investments are in hard infrastructure, roads equipment, and other core infrastructure. And of course, then that's followed up by investments in the fire department with respect to apparatus or personal protective equipment. But that provides an overview of where the capital budget is for this year. It includes a small piece there for studies as well. And that's it for capital at this point.
question from Deputy Mayor Black.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Question with regards to the Canadian winter we're having right now and equipment that we have available. Do we have any snow blower equipment that fits large vehicles to blow snow off of streets and to clear snowbanks and stuff like that? You know, talking more in particularly built up areas, that sort of thing. Do we have any equipment that could even do that? Or is it strictly loaders and trucks and stuff like that? You know, this is I shouldn't say it's an exceptional winter. It's a normal Canadian winter. We've been very lucky the last few years, but we have a buildup of snow in areas that people are walking. And do we have, I grew up in Montreal where they blew everything on your lawn to get rid of the snowbank on the road, to keep the road wide. They blew it up on your lawn all winter, didn't cart it away, didn't throw it in the river. And like that, do we even have equipment that would be possible to take some snowbanks down and blow them up on?
Yeah,
lines or something?
I'll let Adam definitely
Yeah, what's the expert?
speak to that. Yeah, that we actually have a really great local example just happened, right? So turn that over to Adam. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, through you, Madam Mayor. We do have a snowblower attachment that does go on our sidewalk plow, and
Okay.
we did use that the other day when we did snowbank removal in the village.
Okay.
So we'll actually drive alongside the trackless machine with the blower, and we'll actually blow it into the trucks.
Oh, perfect.
So it's been very effective. As far as larger equipment, they do make blowers that will attach to front end loaders and stuff, but I mean, it's cost prohibitive for a municipality our size to really be acquiring such a specialty piece of equipment that's the only reason we use it is just for that specific cause.
Okay.
as far as like blowing the snow on a regular basis with the blower, it does travel a lot slower when we have the blower on. So where we can, we'd rather push the snow with the sidewalk machine.
Yeah.
Some of the built up areas, downtown specifically, once the snow events have concluded, we will go down and remove the snowbanks when they're built up.
Okay.
But keeping in mind, all of our operators have plow rigs, right? So if it's snowing, we can't be removing snowbanks.
No.
So
no,
once we get a
exactly.
chance to get ahead of ourselves and we can, the forecast shows there's a break in the weather, because we can't be out all day removing snowbanks and then go out for 12 hours, like plowing snow too, right? There are CVOR requirements.
Yeah.
So we do look for a break in the weather, and then we do go out and remove the snowbanks.
Thank you. It's nice that we have this new equipment. This is part of the new tractor that we bought. Sorry, follow up, sorry.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we had one on the old MT6 as well.
Okay.
The new unit does have a snow blower attachment with a telescopic chute that can get up and shoot it into the trucks as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Boyko.
Thank you. I was going to bring this up later, but we're talking about it now, so I'm going to bring it up now. And that is that I received a number of people who were asking me about the snowbanks in downtown Lakefield, the core, not just Queen Street, but the core. And I communicated with Adam, and within days, the crew was there. And I went down at 5 o'clock in the morning and watched them operating. And through you, Adam, I wonder if you could thank everyone on that crew for the work that they did at 5 o'clock in the morning, because watching it as I did for about 25 minutes, it moved with military efficiency. It was an incredible operation to watch. So please pass along the thanks for the operation that they did. The snowbanks are there, so the cars are parked safer. The people can get around safer out of their cars and in onto the sidewalks and into the retail outlets. And it is much better and safer for those with mobility issues and the disabled parking by the post office. So please pass along my thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Lane.
Sorry about that. Moving on to reserves. So for us, another key source for capital investments, and an area where we set aside funds for future years, not only for those capital investments, but to also protect us against the unknown or the unforeseen. It's a bit of a chart that I've been presenting for a number of years. It just kind of shows the ebbs and flows of the reserves. Working funds at the bottom, specific reserves in the middle, and then deferred revenues up top. Deferred revenues would be something like development charges or cash into the parkland, something like that. Specific reserves is by far our largest component. And it would include reserves such as the fire equipment reserve, roads construction, roads equipment, and facilities. But it also sets aside some funding for other more specific reserves like insurance contingency or winter control contingency as well. So the reserves and our levels allow us to plan and take those peaks and valleys out of a potential tax levy to make those purchases. Because our goal is kind of slow and steady growth over the years. We have been using specific reserves fairly significantly in the recent years. We have made some really good investments in facilities and roads, and in particular, we'll be coming along to a period of fire equipment purchases as well. And so it's just good to keep those reserves at a sufficient level to provide a solid and stable source of funding. And I'll note as we get to some of the other slides in the specifics by department, where I think there are a few areas where reserves are lacking. One in particular is a new asset area we haven't really had for very long. We need to give that some attention.
Oh, a question from Councillor Boyko.
Through you, Mayor Sanders. Yeah, to you, Lane. You and I have discussed reserves over the years, and we know that you and I agree that healthy reserves is a good thing. My question is there a standard among financial folks such as yourself in various municipalities? Is there a standard, a percentage of total budget, a percentage of expenditures, is there a standard that exists? Or do we simply try to keep the reserves as high as we can?
Yeah, I've actually had that discussion with our auditor, and it's very much almost a municipality by municipality question. Um, we tend to look at just what is on the horizon for the next, say, 5 years. With our respect to some of our equipment, what's the next 10 years, and try to take a look at that. And then it's those unforeseen or unknowns to which are really like, if you'd say, the flexible ones, right? So for instance, in the winter control contingency, we've had a zero balance in that, and then been fortunate that the next winter is not too bad, and then be able to build it back up over time. We had then a period of time where it wasn't sufficient, and we had to increase taxes to get that up to that level. So those are the difficult ones. But no, I've definitely had that discussion, and there doesn't seem to be a tried and true. I do know that we compare well to our comparators, but then even there, you look at those, and some of them, this doesn't consider water and sewer reserves, for instance, those types of things. So if we were to talk water and sewer for a little bit, a few years ago, our sewer reserve was getting very low based on the infrastructure that we had in place. We're building it back up now over time. So, yeah, I would like to say that there is a benchmark number. That would be something that I could every year bring out at budget time and say we're shooting for that. We're trying to get to 15. We're not there. Whatever that number is, right? But
It's interesting that there's not an industry standard for that.
yeah, there. And I think that there may be as time goes on with the asset management plan, right? And that's there's municipalities like Peel Region, Burlington, some of those folks that have been doing Guelph that have been doing asset management for a long time, and so they would be some of the ones I might look to as an example. But yeah, hopefully as asset management plans get better, then those are some of the best practices that we could start to look at.
Okay, thank you.
Question from Deputy Mayor Black.
Thank you, Chair Mayor Sanis. So within this reserve system, are there any restricted funds where the province says we have to have a certain amount in a reserve for particular use? Are any of them considered restricted, or are they all unrestricted funds that really we could technically move funds from one to another to support a reserve that maybe is low, and we have another one that's maybe too high?
Yeah, so I would say the deferred revenues, so those reserve funds at the very end, they would be the ones that we would call restricted, because when we collect cash in lieu of parkland, cash in lieu of parking, development charges, those types of things, we're collecting them for a reason. They're a deferred revenue because we're saying to the developer we need to spend that in the future. So those would be restricted. Our working funds are accumulated revenue. That's essentially our cash flow. So there's flexibility there for sure. And then in our specific reserves, we would take a look at that. And there are municipalities that have did that to, once they have a different maybe policy and procedure in place, they may bring recommendations back to council and say that, these reserves were established in a time, long ago, and we don't require those anymore. We haven't been actively putting money aside into those reserves. They just continue to grow by the interest that we're applying towards it. And then maybe they should be moved somewhere else. So those specific reserves, there is flexibility in there to do that. Of course, we build our capital schedules, replacement schedules, all those things based on the fact that we kind of have a plan on where this is going. So to just take money from one reserve and say, okay, we're just going to move it over here. Well, okay, that's going to affect maybe a plan or replacement schedule or something like that. But we would have a flexibility there. There's a couple of reserves in there which have been around for a long time. They're not an active reserve, and I could take a look at some of those. I do know that when we did some work on the AMO gas tax audit reports, that there were some policies that had been suggested that we should put in place, and one of them is a more robust reserve fund policy. So that would be the type of thing when that comes forward to council, then I would think we could make some recommendations in there on some of those reserves I was thinking about.
Well, thank you, Chair Mayor. Yeah, thanks for that explanation. I think that's important for people out there to understand. We have some pretty good reserve numbers. The specific reserves, obviously they're not restricted. And most of them, from what I understand, is if there is if expenses don't exceed budget, the difference through your in and out reserve goes back into those. So some of those reserves have grown through different departments not using all of their budget, and that's the balancing that you do at year end, right? Where if a department comes in at $900,000 and it's $1 million budget, that 100,000 would fall into the reserve, some of these specific reserves for parks and recreation. But we don't actively annually put into those reserves unless it's a capital a reserve for capital equipment or something like that, correct?
Yeah, so I just have to think that through.
If I can give an example, the police reserves, we're at $2.1 million in police reserves right now. I don't think we contribute to them on a regular basis through taxation.
Yeah, so it's, okay, so if we use that as an example.
Yeah.
We built those area rate reserves up over time if there were savings.
Yeah.
With respect to the Peterborough Police, the one for Lakefield, we actively set that money aside. And so I actually did, it wasn't through tax, but it was through area rates. We actually did area rate over a number of years to build that reserve up because it was under contract. And we were required to pay any additional costs if something came through. So that's set aside as a contingency.
Yeah.
With respect to the OPP, we had years of surplus. So basically we would set aside money and then we would receive refunds back. We set that up. And the same idea now, it's under contract. And then the recent years, we're starting to see charges as opposed to surpluses. Right. So, and so that's when we brought in a recommendation of council, which was approved, that would see the area rate match the contract. Right. So there used to be, use of reserves or use of accumulated surplus back and forth to try to do something to the rates. And so across the board now on both police services, whatever the contract is, that's what the area rate is. And then we have that additional amount if something were to happen. For instance, with the charge this year by the OPP for 2023 reconciliation, we were able to use accumulated revenue or reserve if we needed to pay for that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll move on from reserves over into impacts. So a lot of information in this tab of the binder for sure. It takes into account all of the influences and impacts throughout the entire budget and tries to condense it down into a few pages. I would say this came up in the discussion a few years ago with council. For the most part, it reflects direction already provided by council for programs or levels of service, or expenditures that flow out of council direction, or what I would say is our forward-looking recommendations, which are noted in the budget document. But I can say that to put together this tab, it's a challenging exercise. In aggregating, some of the details are lost, or statements are maybe too broad. And then if you get too detailed, then it becomes too cumbersome, and it's not, it isn't a summary, right? So it's trying to condense down that $26.5 million budget into a few pages. But here we go. So we look at a pie chart. So here's the gross expenditures for 2025. I'll go through a few charts here first before I get into the impact. Obviously, once again, a high priority on infrastructure, roads and storm sewer protection. In this instance, it includes policing as well, fire, building, planning, and bylaw enforcement. General government captures the legislative, administrative, and the financial work and council work for the township. And then rec and library, anything that's specific facilities and arenas, culture, anything like that. So that was gross expenditures. To take a look at net, and now we're just looking at the levy related to taxation. So the blue areas are basically where we were at 2024. And then the yellow amounts on top are the new bits of net tax funding and where it's going in 2025. definitely human resources has an impact across the board, other than in waste management, where we have the landfill site to offset those costs. So we had market rate adjustments there, COLA, and some organizational changes. With respect to insurance, much lesser degree in 2025, but still increases in insurance. Those inflationary pressures we've been talking about, whether it's cost of living, we really don't know if anything's going to change now with respect to tariffs and things like that. So we really can't build that into the budget at this point. But definitely across the board, inflationary pressures on equipment and equipment repairs. We've had third-party agreement changes. Probably the best example of that is the fire dispatch agreement, which is a significant increase. That's been prorated in the budget this year because it kicks in April of each year. And then obviously reserve contributions in fire and rec, and then the new capital levy in fire. So it's kind of in a net tax levy in a chart form. That's where that shows up. When we start to look at it in a summary way at the actual increases, this is probably that high level impacts, but closer to a departmental level. And that's where some of the gross expenditures and some of those broader statements change a little bit, because even though it's in the tax budget, we've got user fees that offset some of those expenses. So you can see there the various bits and pieces in detail. As we go through, we'll go through that in more detail in a bit. The included in the budget binder was a standard sheet that I typically go through and show where the net tax levy increased. And so before we added the additional fire levy, it was at 4.63%. And that's included under the impacts tab. And I can say it took a lot of work to get to 4.63, and it may not look like it when we go through some of the finer details of the impacts, but to step away from some of the suggestions or to decrease reserves or not put reserves in and things like that, when we kind of know that's the right thing to do in some instances, it's a difficult process. So there was definitely a lot of dialogue on that and discussions to get to that point. With respect to the fire capital levy, we had suggested to council that we should start at probably a 2% capital levy this year with respect to fire. In fact, we had used $175,000 as a real dollar value when we presented to council in November. And so we kept it at that level. So 2% would actually be $184,000. We just kept it at the 175 because we can make that work, I think, in our projections. So we ended up at 6.54%. So that's the second page as we worked over there. There's definitely a lot of detail in the impacts area. The next page over looks at it at a high level at $600,000 and then breaks it down by area. One of the biggest offsets that we have this year is with respect to interest revenues. And so interest revenues, there is actually bank revenue, so bank interest, as well as increased penalty charges on taxes as well. So we've outlined, I think, in the narrative or some other point, well, interest charged on taxes helps me at budget time. It also means that our arrears are going up, right? So if this number is going up, then that means our tax arrears are going up as well. And so this is a reflection of, I don't want to go back to the pandemic, but definitely a few years after the pandemic and starting to get back to a resource base where we can actually start to take a little bit harder look at some of those arrears that are getting up. I will say in the last few years, we've been very fortunate that as those arrears have got high, those properties have either sold or they've refinanced and paid taxes. And so that's really helped us. But we are getting to a point now where I think we're going to have to get a little bit more active in our tax collection process and see where we go with that. We still use the 3-year rule with respect to taxes. That changed a few years ago, and we could actually get more aggressive after 2 years. But we found that after 3 years, if we work with folks, we try to put together a payment plan, maybe outline some of the details with respect to maybe if they had a mortgage on their property and things like that, that, you know, they're already in violation of the mortgage if they're behind on their taxes, things like that, just to kind of help inform. And we found that doing that has a good positive effect. So we will be moving in that direction a little bit more, but definitely it's helped us this year with respect to budget time. As I mentioned to council before, we're a service business, so you can see that remuneration adjustments, cost of living increases, things like that has a significant impact in our budget. Across the board, it's almost $600,000. It has a tax impact in that it's in the tax budget, but it isn't always taxation. Sometimes it has a user fee to offset that. Mentioned insurance premiums before, not nearly as much as we've had in the last few years, but still sizable, over $41,000. And when we look throughout the budget at things like fire dispatch service, technology services, subscription costs for technology, the Parks and Rec, Johnny on the spots, worked with our contractors on tree removal, things like that. All of that has increased across the board. And despite the great increases that we've had in terms of outside rentals and non-prime ice and things like that at the arenas, then our costs there that we do to support that is went up as well. And then when we add in our new capital levy, we're up over $736,000, and then we take away our real assessment growth. So, you know, close to $600,000, and then there's a bunch more detail after that. But I'll maybe just pause right there before I go on to talk about what we had to take out of the budget to get to that point. See if there's any questions.
You through Mayor Senes. So on the first page, you have the Orca levy, 7.36%, even though it's $18,000, it still is a significant increase. And I think that is attributed to rather the same issue that planning and building have with respect to permits, numbers not being where they historically were. So we have the OPP rate, area rate, and the Lakefield Police rate. Can you break that down on a per household basis? Do we know what that number is, a cost per household? We're trying to get a clear number on households in Lakefield versus the rest of.
You're looking at the same thing that we all are.
I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think yeah. So I think Deputy Mayor Black's looking at the first page in the impacts tab in the binder. Yeah.
Yeah, first page in the answer.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we've got a total cost and a 3.02% increase for the OPP and a 3.99 for the Lakefield Police area rate. Do we know it per household?
Yeah, I couldn't give you that. I can definitely go through that calculation. I couldn't give you per household though at this point in time for sure.
We have a slide further down that talks about what the increase is.
Yeah, so yes, further down, I definitely talk about the impact on the typical household. So the typical homeowner, that type of thing. So we will get to that for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Later on. Yeah.
One follow-up question?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Follow-up question.
Follow-up question. Thank you, Mayor. Indicated interest and penalties are higher, and it's not always a good thing, obviously. What percentage of taxes are collected at this point? Are we at 90% of what we expect to collect, and is that? I think you're saying it's gone down through COVID. It's reduced through COVID. It's climbing back up?
Yeah. So that is one of those ones to Councillor Boyko's question earlier about benchmarks. That is one of those ones where so 10% municipal affairs, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs looks at 10% as a threshold. And if we start to go over 10%, then that raises a flag. And that, with respect to our asset repayment or our things like that, it starts to say, okay, maybe you're a higher risk. So we've always been well below that 10%. Our figures are somewhere into the 5 to 6, but they are definitely, if they were 5.1 and then they were 5.5 and if they're 5. That's the type of move, right? So I don't know the number exactly, but yeah, I've got to think it's over 6% now. So yeah, it is starting to go kind of in the wrong direction for us.
Fortunately, on sale, municipalities are number one to get paid. So we do get paid at some point.
Yeah, so that's my comment earlier there. We have been fortunate that some of those high tax years have flipped or they've exchanged hands, or or they've just realized, okay, this is too big of a hole for us to get out of. We better refinance and look at something. And so, and we do get paid up.
Thank you.
Okay, so few councils ago that the question came up, well, you know, you keep saying this is a tough budget year. What do you have to do to get here? So, and I will say, even after I put this slide together, I was going through some of my rough notes where I tried to be really meticulous and and I found two other amounts. So it's definitely over 900,000 now. And I say here, what did we have to get? What do we have to do to achieve 4.6? Because that's really what we got to is 4.63 before we added the capital levy. Adam's going to be sick of hearing this, but we're still working on this project about equipment charge out rates. And so we know, I think we're in general agreement that our equipment charge out rates have to be higher. We just don't know what they are yet. But we know that it's at least, a few years ago, it was at least 60,000. I'm thinking 85 plus now at this point in time. And where that affects our budget is that as we use our equipment, we have to charge it to a job. So that means typically those jobs are tax supported. But then that also generates revenue to allow us to replace the equipment or pay for insurance on it, different things like that. So it isn't a break-even scenario. Mike has been putting together really good data in the last couple of years on our ice plants. And so what would happen if we had to do something or if we had a major failure? We have zero reserve for our ice plants right now. Despite the fact that we have set aside money to replace lawnmowers and replace trucks and replace things, that we have zero money for our ice plants. So with respect to, for instance, Ennismore, which is coming up with a floor replacement and chiller and those types of things, we'll need to look at either internal financing of that over a series of years or Infrastructure Ontario funding, which we did in Lakefield before, different things like that. So really, I think almost since day one when Mike came here, we started having those discussions and we started wanting to put aside money for that. And that's just one of those things which would be a new reserve contribution and just doesn't make it into the budget. We have a piece of software that we subscribe to for our asset management plan with respect to GIS, and it's being used now probably most extensively by law enforcement. I think it's probably one of the best users of that system. And instead of it being built into our budget, I fund it out of the OC grant because it's eligible for that. These additional built-in reserve transfers of 150 plus, that's some of the areas I'll talk to. Structures that we don't have any reserve for, stormwater management that we don't have hardly any reserve for. The next two areas are in public works in particular. Council will recall in our public works equipment replacement, we needed to set aside $300,000 a year to be able to purchase the equipment that we had to. We weren't close to that. And that's where we've pledged to council, we'll come back with a report to rationalize our equipment, take a look at it in a little bit different way. That ties in with the comment I made before about the fleet charge and some of that. And the other part is on equipment sales. Typically, and it's always been our practice, if we sell an old piece of equipment, it used to be a trade-in value, so it just came off the price of the equipment. Now we found over the years that we can use gov deals or something like that to get better value than a trade-in. We've always taken that money and put it directly into the same reserve that we were taking money out of. And this year in particular, the only way that we could actually balance Department 22 and set aside some money was to use some of that equipment sales up to do that. Yeah, so not a great practice. Really, those top 6 areas, when we got right down to it and we started looking at the document, they quickly came out and we realized that we couldn't put those in. I would say the works equipment one took longer for us to realize because we worked through, you have to work through your projects and figure out how you're using your equipment and things like that. But it didn't make the cut to get in for sure. Looking down a little bit further, our technology reserve, it's really taken a hit over the last few years as we maximize technology. We were proposing to increase that by $10,000. That came out. User fees and operational receipts. So yeah, we definitely looked at that interest revenue we're getting at the bank, and that's one of those ones where CAO always puts my arm behind my back and suggests maybe we should get a little more interest revenue in there. And also Mike took a hard look at some of his receipts at the different spots where there was a user fee. And we are recommending a user fee increase at the landfill site this year too. And then we used up some accumulated revenue or maybe used a reserve a little bit. And then finally I went back through and just fine tuned actually across every department. We had a couple of other amounts in the budget with respect to some others, summer students and some other training and things like that. And that was another $20,000 that I came up with that. If we'd actually funded all of those things, the increase of the net tax levy would have been 16%. So that's not something that I knew was going to be palatable here. And so that's why they didn't get into the final cut. And as I say, the top 6 didn't even make it into the preliminary round. Some of these things are definitely going to be coming back before council when we deal with the asset management plan, because I don't think it's responsible for us to look at structures. In some instances, structures that are the only way into some of our ratepayers. If we looked at Fothergill Isle, if we looked at Fraser Street and where Extendicare is, things like that, those structures, if they fail, then they've got to be replaced quickly, and we've got to have an alternate solution somehow. And at this point in time, we don't even have any reserves to replace them. So those are some of the things that we'll be bringing back at asset management time and try to figure out how can we phase something like that in over time and start to set aside those reserves. And it isn't that, yeah, we've got a $2.5 million reserve. It isn't like we need that reserve to $2.5 million right away. We just got to start the process to phase it in and start to have some money set aside. So that's how we got down to 4.63%. The question always comes up to what is 1% levy increase? So this year it's up to $92,000. So after we adjust for real growth by $92,000, we take it down, and we adjust for real growth, $92,000 of new expenditure is a 1% tax levy increase. So yeah, when you start looking at $900,000 and then look at $92,000, it doesn't translate into a lot of money for sure. But that's really what I was going to speak to on the impacts tab, but there's lots of information in there. So if there's any other questions before we move on. Okay, I'll move on to department highlights and next steps. Same approach here. I could speak about a lot of this budget stuff all day, but council's had the document for a while, and there's a lot of information. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at it. I'll try to hit though on highlights of the dollar values and also effort and time that staff are going to be investing in these areas. And there's definitely I'll try to leave lots of chance for council to have any questions as we work through. General government. We've mentioned interest rates, but they definitely have rebounded over the last few years. I think we have a good number in the budget, but definitely the impacts of tariffs on the economy and some of the information I've been reading about the Bank of Canada responses to that and where the Bank of Canada rate could be by fall, those types of things that could impact us in a fairly big way. We had success investing in a variable rate GIC a few years ago, but then based on some information from our banker, we moved that over to a high interest savings account. And so we currently have about $14 million invested in high interest savings. But just obvious caution here, it relates to the Bank of Canada rate. So some concern there. We've definitely, with council direction, implemented a lot of technology improvements over the years to increase customer service. Over time, it's definitely increasing efficiencies, but there's definitely a lot of back end work that goes into that. And then also the change to subscription-based software, which I've mentioned at council before. So it just continues to go up. We'll continue to maximize these new systems and the technology that we use along the way. And of course, a lot of technology and online services, there's service charges that go with it too. So we try to limit the amount of, say, credit card use, those types of things that we can, but sometimes there's a credit card charge for that. We are looking at some municipalities use credit cards in a different way so that the credit card charge is passed on to the user of it as opposed to being an expense for us. And so some municipalities do that as well, but we're taking a look at all the different options and still trying to provide good customer service. So that's it on general government. Over to facility and properties. So a human resource impact here, we've got half of our new risk and emergency management position in here because this is where some of our insurance goes in our different facilities. So we're decreasing our reserve contribution here to help offset part of that. I guess it was just last year, we implemented the $200,000 investment from UMP into facilities after our facility assessment was completed. This year, Mike and Jerry have been able to look through what is required and bundle up a number of routine capital maintenance items into 4 major theme areas. The thought there is that we'll benefit maybe from some requests for quotations or requests for proposals if we can bundle those things up. But that's outlined in the capital portion. But we have increased the contribution to 250,000 this year from up from 200,000. And over into economic development, community development. I think it's great that and staff I know are really pleased to be working with the county's new economic development group and having it housed right here in Selwyn in the old post office. I think is great. In this area, we've got 2 major investments for community development. We have $50,000 available to support joint initiatives and maximize the township experiences. So that's either through advertising or through a marketing program. And so I know that Angie's staff will be chatting with the county folks there to try to maximize that money as much as possible. And this is also where we have our community improvement plan. That's our standard investment is $75,000. We're proposing that CIP program would be expanded this year. It's outlined in the narrative, but and there will be an additional report coming from council. But maybe I might get Angie just to chat about that a little bit. We talked about maybe just giving a bit of an outline of what's in the narrative before the report comes to council, just so the council has an understanding of that.
Yeah, so thank you. So you will have noted in the narrative and in Lane's report that there is a recommendation that council tell us to go and do a report to come back and outline some additional financial incentives that we can bring forward to augment our current CIP financial incentive program for businesses. So we do currently have 4 programs. They've been well used. Businesses really appreciate it. It is a great program. There were some other components in the CIP that we didn't activate. So we'd like to look at activating a couple of those. One being the building grant and the other one being a residential grant. So when I say residential grant, I'm not saying we're going to provide an incentive to homeowners to build your home, but this would be in our priority 1 areas, which essentially are our hamlets in like our downtown cores, where we have mixed use. So commercial and maybe some residential above or within it. So we would bring back some further details for council to outline what those programs would entail, what they would look like, what kind of maximum grant a potential applicant could get from the program. We just think that this is an opportunity for us to maybe expand some opportunities for our businesses to look at a different type of grant that they haven't been able to get access to. Certainly the residential grant in a mixed use area, that's going to help us potentially with increasing some housing opportunities or rental opportunities for people in the community. So we would like council to support that. We do a little bit of work on that and bring back that report to council. So that's really high level. I'm not trying to get into the details on that. You will get a report on it.
Question from Deputy Mayor Black.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thanks for that explanation on the residential one. So right now the CIP is very specific zones that grants can be applied and they can't be in outside the downtown area or of each of the villages and so on.
So just to, just to be clear,
Yeah.
the 4 grants we currently have available, they apply to anybody across the entire township.
Okay,
So if you're a commercial, institutional or mixed use, if you have that zoning, no matter where you are in the township, you can apply for that.
okay,
The building grant would be similar.
right.
The residential grant is definitely specific to priority 1 areas. And the report I've got maps that actually
Okay.
show the delineation of what those priority 1 areas are, but they're very specific in our downtown cores in Ennismore, Youngs Point, Lakefield, and who did I miss? Bridge North.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're really focused on the mixed use type of building that would be in our downtown core.
Thank you, through Mary. Yeah, so thanks for that explanation. I think, again, the public needs to understand, so we can get people applying for these funds. The funds balance is the same as last year. It's over $300,000 is, I think, what is expected. So you feel that this change in the program will make some use of those funds because that's essentially 4 years worth of contributions that
Yeah.
haven't been used.
Yeah, I do think that Janice and I actually met with Luch Pachoni. I think many of you would have maybe dealt with Luch. He's done our last 2 study updates. We kind of talked our way through, we've kind of plateaued, and he did tell us, he said, you're going to get to a point where you're probably going to plateau a little bit. You maybe want to think about enacting some of the incentives that you haven't currently had as an opportunity for businesses. So particularly with the building grant, like we don't fund anything for a business right now if they need to do a HVAC update or some interior improvement in their business. Maybe they want to put in a new customer service counter, or they have to address a fire suppression system in their building. So that's not been available to our businesses. So I think that would be something that would be a value, and I think our businesses would appreciate having an opportunity to apply for.
Well, yeah, so you still feel that 75,000 additional is still needed this year? Because I spoke to this last year saying
Yep.
nothing's changed year over year in the reserve. So I'm just
Yep,
concerned
no,
that we're putting
yep,
more tax
that's-
dollars into a reserve that's not
So-
really
so
getting
we-
used.
Sorry, didn't mean to talk over you, pardon me.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, we recognize we want to make use of the money. So we want to look at having these incentive opportunities. They will be new, so hopefully we'll get a whole new uptake on it. And then, of course, we're also recommending that any unused amount does get transferred into the public realm, which, as we know, as Elaine has explained with reserves, we're making investments in our public realm and we have no money to do that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ange, for that. So yeah, I could just build on that last bit. We have found it difficult to fund public realm. Some good examples, I think the delays of the Ennismore CIP would be a clear example. That was around the capital program 2 or 3 years, I think, before we could put together a funding bucket that would kind of make it work. And of course, we know that we have upcoming investments on Ward Street in 2026, I think, to start anyway. We've provided some initial design money to that, but when it comes to hard, fast public realm investments, we don't really have anything, and we know that we're going to have to make investments there. So, and we did hear the comments about the good reserve. So we have a good reserve in place for those private sector investments and incentives. So we're proposing, and I just want to make it clear, we're proposing essentially the same as last year, but it's included in the recommendation this year. When we chatted about it, we had a good discussion last year, but we didn't feel that we had really clear direction to take that money and set it aside into a public realm reserve. But so that's why it's built into the report this year and built into the recommendation. So we just felt with the clear direction from council that could take place. So because we would establish then this new public realm CIP reserve, and we would still have the 2. We've checked with Luch, and the use of the 75,000 as a CIP investment overall, it could go either into financial incentive or into public realm. And I think that was Councillor Koulis's question last year, I think. And so we have clarified that for sure. So Yeah, in 2020, we're saying in 2024, so any of that surplus and beyond, it would go into the CIP Public Realm Reserve. And then once again, as this new, if council supports the new report when it comes forward, we'll see where that goes down over the next number of years as we make these investments.
Question from Deputy Mayor Black.
Thank you, through Mayor Sens. So just so I understand, so applications for 2025, we're applying additional 75,000. The applications for 2025, will they be drawn from legacy funds, or is the new 75, they take from the new 75 and then what's left there goes to public realm? Or are we taking from legacy the 300,000 that's sitting there and the full 75 will pull to public realm?
So what's being proposed at the 75 that's in the existing budget would continue. So there wouldn't be new money that would go in there. It would still be available for private sector investment. And just at the very end of the year, whatever was left in there, instead of it going into the existing CIP reserve, it would go into this new CIP Public Realm
Okay.
Reserve.
So it's not the legacy money being used first. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Boyd.
Thank you. With the, I assume the conclusion of the conversation about that, I'd like to move on to 12 Queen Street and ask a question about that if I could. By the way, just tangential, thank you. The report, there are sections that is beyond budget and dollars and cents. Thank you for that. That really helps me to understand a lot that I don't think I would have understood without those sections in each. So thank you for that. With respect to 12 Queen Street, two questions. One, it's an old building and we spent a lot of money renovating it. Do we believe that the renovations are now done? Is it complete? Is there any unexpected expenses going to be going into that building this year, or is it done? Is it fine?
I was going to say that you don't want to see your facility guy get up and leave the meeting.
As soon as I start asking questions, he started to leave.
There was heating concerns that I was gonna deal with, but through you, Madam Mayor, we don't anticipate any major. We have a couple of things to do that are in the hundreds of dollars, but nothing
Good.
further to that.
Excellent. I recall when we were discussing this, my second question, that the building costs approximately 25,000 a year just to keep the lights on, to run the place for heat and hydro and the rest. And I know that we're in a pilot situation with as leasing the building. Will there be net revenue in? I couldn't find it. It might be in here, but I couldn't find it. Will there be net revenue this year through the leasing of that building?
If there is, it's very small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I think that as the pilot works through and as we chat with the renewal of the lease, we'll have to take a look at where that is. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Okay. We'll move on to fire service.
Yeah, I propose we take a bio break at 2:30. So,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so I didn't speak to solar, Department 8. It's no taxation goes in there. We're still pleased with how generation of that is coming along and putting the money aside into the sustainability reserve, which we can then draw upon to use in the tax budget. But was going to speak to that. Moving on to fire service. Obviously this year, the largest impact in our entire budget with respect to taxation. We have saw some initial savings from the revised response protocols that are in place. And as a result, in discussions with the chief and deputies, there was agreement that we would remove any call volume increases from the budget. We would typically look at those call volumes and average it over 4 or 5 years and then increase it by, typically it's 5%. So we didn't increase call volumes this year. We kept it at an average. I can say that's the first time in decades that we've did that. So that's a good sign. It'll be an important year to monitor this new communications arrangement that we have up at Lindsay. There is some concern that maybe we'll have to stay on scene longer. So maybe we won't respond to some calls, but maybe we have to stay on scene longer. So we haven't quite figured that out, but we're monitoring that. So as a result of that, we didn't increase call volumes and we used the average, and then we're just monitoring throughout this year. Of course, this department's also affected by the market rate changes and cost of living. It's a service department primarily, so big drivers there. We've talked about the cost of insurance, the dispatch agreement, which I mentioned was prorated, but increasing as well, and then equipment maintenance for sure. But the largest impact really is the replacement schedule and the impacts on it. So just to summarize where those increases are and how they affect the replacement schedule. First off, the annual increase would increase, the contribution would increase by $25,000. And so that is an impact on the tax budget. It takes the contribution annually up to $320,500. It would allocate $250,000 from UMP for a period of time, and I think the schedule showed 3 years at the first time, in the first few years, and that would go directly into the reserve. And the reason it's just for the first few years is because we still need to figure out what's going on with the works fleet. And so we may need to pull some of those funds back 3 years from now to put into the works fleet to make that work. And then there is a proposed new capital levy of $175,000. And so, as I mentioned, it's a little less than 2%, but it's essentially a 2% capital levy. And that would be funded from taxes and dedicated specifically to the fire capital reserve. So really, if council will recall, midway through our 10-year replacement schedule, we're still at a point where I think it's the is it SCBA? I think it's the SCBA replacement. We've did that over a 2-year period, but I think it's the second year that we still go briefly in the hole. So we've got to figure out what is going to take place there. But with these investments, we can see ourselves through the next 10 years of capital investments at the fire department. And then we also have a report that Chief and Deputy have put together in draft, and some more work to do there to bring that back to council as well, to take a look at the composition of the apparatus and how it can be maybe used a little bit differently. So with all of those additional investments, we feel that the fire department is kind of right-sized with respect to its replacement schedule, and then kind of hopefully good news coming forward too from the report from the department as well.
Question from Councillor Boyko.
Thank you through your Mayor Sennis. We discussed this, I know, when we talked about it several weeks ago, but I just want to go back and make sure that we understand. So when we're saying first dedicated capital levy, are we going to be looking at another 2% capital levy next year?
Yeah, so I can say that I think as part of the asset management plan, there will be additional capital levies. Yeah, and I wouldn't want to say 2%, wouldn't want to say it's the first of many, but I think that capital levies, which are fairly common in municipalities, I think that it is going to be a way that we're going to have to fund our asset management plan.
Okay, thank you.
This capital levy, the way that's laid out, is an initial almost 2%, and then it would just be CPI increases after that.
Right.
So it isn't like this 2 plus another 2 next year for fire and another. It's just the initial 2 for fire and then CPI. But then some of these other asset management areas could see capital levies.
Thank you.
Question from Deputy Mayor Black.
Thank you, through Mayor Sennis. So just looking at the revenue and expense ledger that you've put out here. When I look at 2024 actuals, transfers in was about 91,000, and transfers out this year is 403,000. So that's a contribution to the reserve that will go into reserve for 2024 automatically. We're contributing that amount.
Yeah, so you're looking at the 2024 year to date
Of 85. It's the
Yes,
revenue and
yeah.
expense summary.
I just want to make sure I was looking at the right summary. So so the 90 would have came in to offset a big section of our capital purchases.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the 403, that would be a combination of the amount that we're putting into reserve for equipment replacement and the amount that's being transferred out to some other departments for hydrant maintenance, and also the amount that's being charged out to pay back for the Youngs Point Fire Hall. So it's
Sorry, the last part, Innismore Fire Hall?
to pay back the facilities reserve for the Youngs Point Fire Hall from the
Youngs Point.
development charges, yeah. I'll just flip over here.
Just looking the year before, it's a negligible, the difference is $80,000 the year before or 60,000 on the budget.
Yeah. Yeah,
Just trying to
so,
understand why there's such a big, it's over 310,000, I think, this year.
yeah, so, so we're putting $300,000 aside, in that transfers, there's
Yep.
$298,000 is for equipment. The other amount is because last year we had a deficit. And this year we don't have a deficit.
Okay.
In the fire department.
Well, thanks for that. So when I look at the salary increases for this year, it's 16% over actuals, versus 6% versus last year's budget. And, you know, your narrative has talked about call volume probably going down, but we don't want to budget it based on that number. Why are we basing such a large increase when the number we came in $18,000 under budget for salaries last year, but yet we're budgeting to the 2024 budget number as opposed to the actual, which is a huge difference. It's a difference of $184,000 versus $68,000.
Yeah, so one of the things would be in looking at actuals, right, is if we're looking at the call volumes, if we're looking at the wage, if we're looking at all those things, right? As opposed to looking at the budget figure, which is baked into our net tax levy. So we already know that we had market rate adjustments that would be 6% anyway for full-time staff. Cost of living increases about 2%. And then we right-sized all the volunteer payouts as well so that they would tie into our grid at this point in time. So instead of just the cost of living increases for all of the volunteer firefighters, they now tie back to a comparable on our full-time grid. So that's a fairly large
Hourly
number.
rate, right? Hourly rate.
Yeah,
Is
that's
what you're
correct.
saying?
Yeah.
So that's 16% year over year increases.
I'd have to take a look at the percentages, but one of the other things too is in that number is a series of training exercises. I shouldn't call them exercises. They're what are they called? And the NFPA thing. So there's NFPA guidelines, and we need to meet certain criteria within a certain period of time. So those would be built into this year's salaries, but in some instances they're being offset, not through taxation.
Right.
And I don't know, maybe Howard, do you want to talk about those? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, you're talking about the certification that's coming through.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to, there's going to be quite an increase in the amount of hours and courses that our firefighters are going to have to take. So that'll be, that'll be an expense in hourly wage. So if they do we'll do a hybrid course where they have to do a few hours online, and then they maybe do an 8-hour class, or then some of the courses are 40 hours. They get paid for their online time and they get paid for that actual course. But with the mandatory certification, this is where we have to go, the direction.
That was the phrase I couldn't remember, mandatory certification. So that's part of the reason. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, are we done with this department?
Yep.
Before we take a break?
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions with regards to fire? Seeing none. 5-minute bio break. Come back by 25 to 3, please. All right, we will bring this meeting back to order and it's back over to Lane.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My clicker is once again not working. No,
Nope.
no, the other way. No, well, you're going backwards, so.
There we
Okay,
are.
there we are. Yeah, thanks. So we're on, building and bylaw enforcement. Building fees have been increased by CPI in the budget. So just a point there, there's no tax dollars that go to support building inspection, even though this department has a number of different things included in it. So we have no tax dollars going to building inspection. We are drawing down the building reserves again this year, just to as we wait for the economy to kind of rebound a little bit, and we're holding out some hope there. Things are definitely busy in the department. Just a note there on the slide, we have drawn down the building reserve by a little over 400,000 since 2020. So that's, kind of through the pandemic, and then as things are picking back up. I think Robert and I were chatting at one point, and every time the Bank of Canada makes an announcement, there's a bit of the rate comes down, there's a bit of an uptick in terms of calls and things like that. I think the point to make too is that it may not translate right away into a building permit, but building inquiries take a lot of time, a lot of effort. And of course, in this department in particular, we've got the transition over to us taking care of septic inspections as well, which is a real driver in terms of effort in that department for sure. We've now in this budget fully implemented council's approvals with respect to bylaw enforcement. So there isn't an increase in this area for taxation support of bylaw enforcement, but really it's more to do with administrative support and support of the manager, because as bylaw enforcement, kind of as the word kind of spreads, then you get a little bit more effort that goes into bylaw enforcement, and then you get more bylaw enforcement issues that come forward. So Robert's spending a little bit more time there supporting Chris, and so that's where some of that tax increase comes from. We also in the budget have changes with respect to small animal control this year, the new relationship that we have with the Humane Society and the new agreement, and we're switching to DocuPad with respect to licensing and the issuance of dog tags. This department also includes the Heritage Committee work, so that's in there, but there's no impact on taxes for that, and also source water protection, which is funded through taxation, and we had phased that in over a couple of years, but that's fully phased in now, and that's been adjusted this year as well. That's all I have to say about that department.
You have a question? Question from Deputy Mayor Black.
Thank you, through Mayor Sennis. We skipped Department 11 and 12. Please,
It's
please.
not on his, he's going by his deck.
Yeah, so with respect to 11, I'll speak about that at the end when we talk about tax rates and area rates. And then with respect to 12, we treat that as an area rate as well.
Okay, so we'll do that then.
Yep.
He's going by his deck there, Ron.
Yeah, I thought we were following the binder is what we were told at the start. So just clarification. Thanks for that. We'll get to those things. Just with respect to permits in the building department and in the bylaw enforcement area. The narrative says here that we've seen a rebound in the last 2 quarters of 2024. In the 25 number of revenues include a CPI increase and so on. So the rebound in the last 2 quarters of 2024, are we getting close to 2021 permit numbers? And do we think 2025 will kind of ramp things up again?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Sennis. So there's a couple of different components that kind of come into the background of this. permit numbers in Q3 in 2024, for example, were considerably higher than 2023. And so we've started to see that growth. I haven't completely reviewed the end of the year for last year. So we do see that steady increase, and the amount of inquiries we're processing have definitely increased. So it looks like it's going to be a busy year in 2025. The township had experienced some exceptional years through 2020, 2021 for permit numbers. I think cresting above 500 permits or and just below that in those 2 years that you referenced, which from the information that I looked back on historically were our peak years. So I'm not certain, obviously, because I don't fully know what's going to be coming in, but it does look like that we will achieve some much better numbers in this coming year. And additionally, of course, the revenue component of that, when we did switch to the cost per square footage away from the construction value calculations for our revenue system, that work had been done based on some of our best years. So we kind of took a double hit with the slowdown in the economy and that transition of revenue source calculation.
Yeah, thanks. Follow up?
Mhm.
Thank you. With respect to bylaw enforcement, bylaw enforcement, do we have an on-call system for weekends and things when there are concerns out there? I'm thinking more short-term rentals, that sort of thing. Are we, and the other one was the parking issue. I know we were looking at the fining system and stuff like that, where we would be able to do parking tickets and that sort of things. Where are we with that process at this point?
Through you, Mayor Sennis, I'll address those in reverse order. So we are, myself and CAO have been in an AMP working group developing the municipal monetary penalty system. So that is happening in the background, and we hope to get some decent progress and maybe even start implementation towards the end of this year with that system. As for the parking, we do have our third-party bylaw enforcement officers, which council appointed, I believe it was 3 years ago now, but that's Maximum Protection Inc. They do overnight patrolling in certain areas for parking. They do issue a warning tag for a first offense and have vehicles towed for follow-up offenses on the same vehicles. So that is a fairly successful program that we've had overall good response, especially this year with that, with the introduction of the updated parking tags, which certainly allow for more visibility of that program. And as towards the first question, we currently do not have an on-call or after-hour system. Council has not provided us with that direction. There was a working group prior to my time with regard to short-term rentals, and the decision was just to handle it through business hours with our enforcement protocol that was put into place.
So we don't have anybody after hours, basically.
That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, move on to Public Works. Definitely some human resource pressures there once again, and some insurance impacts. Adam continues to work with Scott and Derek there to consider new methods of implementing the departmental improvements. Our budget this year is based on a full staff complement. Definitely trying to capture full asset improvement investments. And so the example we use would be on the pre-build work. So if we know that we're doing a road, the 6th line would be a really good example, which is the photo it's up. Any pre-build work, so roadside brushing and those types of things. And then post resurfacing, when we would go back and do some cleanup work and maybe sweep up any of the excess. Those types of things before may have been captured in an operating expense. It doesn't capture the full value of the capital investment. So we're working through that with Adam and his crew. And it'll be funded into a grant or reserve as opposed to operating. There's definitely a lot of moving parts in this department, with weather obviously playing a large factor here and in winter control, but throughout the public works departments. And yeah, as I mentioned before, I keep chatting with Adam about some of these different perspectives and things, and he continues to work through looking at it in a different way and working with his staff to come up with different methods of considering something that we maybe did for years. And so the one that we'll be working at really heavy in 2025 is equipment use and its replacement. And we'll be providing more reports back to council on that. Number of different improvements that are being made on roadside cutting this year and different things. So just working through some new initiatives, but just to be a telling year in terms of that and the report and just to see how we're set up for the future. Moving along to winter control, fairly light fall, winter in 2024, but definitely the snow accumulation is picked up and is higher now in early 2025. Maybe more like, as we were saying, maybe more like a typical or an old-fashioned winter. There's also, of course, the daily challenges to tend to in this department. So road patrols, spot sanding along different routes or sidewalks, and then clearing any of the municipal lots or entrance ways. And of course, if there isn't winter activities to keep the crew busy, then tree removal and brushing activities is always something that comes along, and they would capture that, of course, in Department 20, but that fills their day. Last year, we set aside almost $80,000 in our winter control contingency, so the balance there is at $151,000. And I think that our level of funding so far this year, unless we get a really intense winter in 2025, with our existing base funding and then that winter control contingency, we're set up in pretty good shape. And then that's why we're not projecting any increase in taxation for winter control this year. I don't really have any comments on Department 22, which is equipment, because we've chatted about that quite a bit. And on 23 and 24, unless there's any questions there, I'll just carry on. So Department 25 is community transportation. We're definitely pleased that the province extended the community transportation pilot program. So that's allowed us not only to complete the recent feasibility report that was presented to council, but also maximize the grant and get some more data. As it's going to help us with more years of experience, more data and annual ridership numbers. And as outlined in our work plan, staff are going to be reporting back on the link in the second quarter with options for council to consider. But at this time, other than Department 25, how it's laid out and fully funded by the grant, other than insurance, there's no proposed taxation support for the link in the 2025 budget.
Question from Councillor Boyko.
This has nothing to do with community transportation. I'm going back a couple of pages in the binder to Department 23, skipped streetlights. And I noticed that, and I think I understand this, but I want to make sure that I do. Last year, year to date, there was $20,000, and this year's almost $159,000. Are those the new streetlights on the causeway? Is that the increase?
No. Last year's 20 was the last payment towards the causeway lights.
Yeah.
So that had been over a number of years before.
Okay.
I can't remember the exact number, but let's say it was maybe 150 and I'd only paid 130 up to that point. The 158 is the component of street lighting and things in the Innismore CIP program.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I understand it now. Thank you.
Okay. Move on from community transportation to structures. And this is one of those areas that I have some concern that we don't have sufficient reserves set aside. This is a relatively new asset class for us. We've had the assets for a while. It was just some technicalities in our discussions with the county that we realized some of these were actually our responsibility and not the county's. We had an engineering review completed in 2024, which it's part of a biannual review, so every 2 years. And there were no immediate safety concerns with the structure, so that's great news. They did continue to have a recommendation with respect to guide rails on the 7th line. So it's possible that that would be in our 2026 budget, or possibly the next year, depending on funding. So it's good news at this point that there aren't any structural issues. I know that Adam has reviewed the report, and there's some annual maintenance that's built into the budget this year, but we have sufficient tax money there to take care of that. The concern here, though, is definitely virtually no reserve for a core asset of at least $2.5 million, maybe even more at this point. So this will be something that will be front and center in the asset management plan when it comes forward.
I have a question while we're on that. I hesitate to ask it, but has there been any other activity with regards to Fothergill?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, it's been quiet so far. So no news is good news right now.
Fingers crossed. Thank you.
Okay, so move along to waste management, Department 33. So we do have a proposal for some tipping fee increases in April. It's essentially $5 a metric ton. And that would be spread across a number of different areas. So implementing in April, which was consistent with last year, but I think years before it had been in June maybe, but we're being consistent with the last year's increase. This is year 2, but the final year of our contract with CMO. They basically provide funding to help us offset the cost of recycling at our depots. And that's a really simplified way of saying it. Deanna is our expert, so I'll turn it over to her if we have any questions. But the impact on that operation is about $50,000. Yeah, taxation in this area at this point just funds the collection contract and waste diversion initiatives. The collection contract was extended last year. It had increased last September by 5%. It should increase again this September by 4%. So we've calculated all that through. The only bit of unknown is the fuel surcharge. And so we've tried to be consistent with figuring that out as well. But no increase there this year.
Question from Deputy Mayor Black.
Thank you, through Mayor Sennis. So with the producer responsibility process, they're using our landfill site as their depot, and they still are required to have a depot within the municipality, correct? So if they don't use ours, then they have to set something else up somewhere else, and that would require zoning and all those sorts of things, I would imagine.
Yeah, so there is some lack of clarity around that. My interpretation is that because we have island properties that don't have access to curbside, that our depot would be a required depot. I have gotten some mixed messages on that from CMO, so
Okay.
I have reached out again on that. I haven't heard back, so that is something that we'll be working on. Despite that, like I'm hopeful that they just see the value of the depot. It's a very busy depot. We collect a lot of materials, so I am hopeful that we'll be able to work through the process with them and retain the depot and have them continue to support the operation. The one thing that will be very different, though, is the non-eligible sources. So right now, non-eligible sources are mixed with our residential sources, and then we just get a deduction in our payment amount based on our percentage of ICNI properties. That will not be allowed post-transition. That they will have to be 2 separate areas at the landfill site. So a couple of things there that we need to work through. We're not really 100% sure at this point what the county is going to do. If the county maintains some services for non-eligible service or non-eligible properties, then we may have the opportunity to work with the county for a county contract for collection from the depots for those ones. But yeah, so there's a few things to work through on that front in 2025.
Question.
Yep, follow up. Thank you, through Mayor. Yeah, the non-eligible thing is just a disaster as far as the provincial legislation around this. It's just creating a second system that we really don't, shouldn't have to have. My question is with regards to mixed loads. I've spoken a couple of times at county council. There are still a lot of mixed loads, recyclables in regular garbage going into Bensford. They are charging a premium if it's not separated. Do we have a separate fee for mixed load or is it all 1 ton per ton rate?
It's actually the fee is doubled if. Yes.
It is? Okay,
Yeah.
so we do
Yeah.
have for.
Or if
mixed
it's
load-
not in a clear bag, so you can't see whether
Right.
it's mixed or not, then the fee is doubled. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Actually, I have a question. The increased contact cost by 4%, is that for recycling or for garbage? The bottom.
Yeah, no, that's for our waste collection contract. Yeah, so just for
For
garbage,
garbage.
just for garbage.
Was that increased amount passed on to the county with regards to their looking at uploading?
Yes, I've provided all that information to the county. They have
Okay.
it, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Oh, yes, Councillor Cool's.
Through you, just a follow-up. Are other municipalities having the same issue with CMO? In regards to lack of,
Yes.
thank you.
Across the board, yeah.
Okay, moving on to stormwater management. This year we'll be in operations, getting back to catch basin cleaning and related documentation. Hadn't had it for the last year or two because we had the CCTV work that was going on and they were taking care of it as part of that project. We're definitely at a point where that inspection footage will support the asset management plan. So we haven't got that information back yet, but we'll be reviewing that. Another area really where I think that we just don't have sufficient reserves, a lot of infrastructure underground that we now are going to be able to track and have really good data on. And we've definitely improved some of the, say, the catch basins and things like that. The approach that Adam has outlined on catch basin cleaning and documenting that could save us some money in some years, but more importantly, really provide us with data. There's a lot of granulars and buildup in catch basins and things like that. That could be a problem area. So we may be able to check into that a little bit more. Capital that's included in the budget this year is at Strickland Street and also part of the CIP work in Ennismore, although a big portion of that will be funded by the county because a big section of that's on the county road. But once again, stormwater management, that's something I'll be presenting to council as part of the asset management plan. Over to parks and arenas, generally all of Mike's departments. We have human resource impacts there, although we do have the arenas that user fees are able to offset some of those impacts. We are using increased user fees in accordance with right now in accordance with our tariff of fees bylaw. Mike's reviewing that. We have increased contractor costs that are impacting pretty much more in the parks area for sure. With small increases in our reserve contributions to equipment in Department 40 and then at both of the arenas. So for the resurfacers, it's went from a $10,000 annual contribution to $12,500. And so that was updated on the replacement schedule that came before council. We have increased taxation support at both of the arenas to offset the minor sports subsidy, but also increased insurance costs and any of the increased costs related to the AODA. Definitely Parks is experiencing some challenges there related to those price escalations on the portable toilets. The Emerald Ash situation is getting to a point where some of them have to be removed and more so like on top of typical tree removal. With respect to arenas, we've completed a really good year at both arenas. Rentals have really taken off, and Mike was just speaking recently about the non-prime ice time, which that's really the type of ice that we need to rent. We typically don't have a problem with prime time. It's the non-prime, and so with every hour of non-prime that gets rented out, that's closer to break even. We're not quite there yet, but the facilities seem to have really turned the corner with respect to revenue generation.
Question from Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. So we're through this section here. So the Lakefield, the marina, we have 25 seasonal slips and 14 transient spaces. That doesn't include the new spaces along the trail on the beach side. That's just the marina right now.
Yeah, that is, sorry, through you, Madam Mayor, that is just, the numbers you're quoting are strictly the marina locations.
Marina location. So is there any plan to add any more spaces either in the marina or on the other side of the river along the trail?
Last year, sorry again, through you, Madam Mayor, last year, 4 spots were added to Hague.
Yeah.
And there's no immediate plans to add to the marina, but it is something that was identified in the marina utilization study. And it is something we've initiated very initial talks with TSW. So it's, yeah. To say that it's planned, I would say it'd be a little too much.
That's a very high
It
level.
is being looked at.
Thank you, through Mayor, as a follow-up. I asked because I got pulled aside yesterday for 20 minutes about somebody who said he's been on the list for years to get into the marina, and what are we gonna do about it? Can we add more spaces? And I think it's not so much the transient ones. I'm hearing from several people that they've been waiting on the list for a long time to get. And how long does that take for them to go from the bottom of the list to actually getting a seasonal slip? So is there an opportunity to add more seasonal slips? It seems like there's a demand there. We have a waiting list. Maybe you can comment on how long the waiting list, and typically how long does it take for somebody on the waiting list to actually get one of these slips?
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor. There is a significant list. We were able to do a few things that reduced it significantly. It was about 70-ish. It's down to 25, 26. Some of it was reaching out to people. Because some people had their name in there for so long that they no longer wanted to vote. I can't answer you as to how many years because it is so dependent on size of the boat, on what power. If they want a 50 amp and they have a 60-foot boat, they're likely going to be on for 10 years. We only have 2 slips that fit that category, or that accommodate that category. Generally, it's more about 3 to 4 years. But again, it's so dependent on do they fit within a finger dock? Do they need to be on one of the tees? That the turnover is so different. We have looked at the possibility of adding, but there's so many parts to that. The distance between the end of the potential T-dock on the other side and the channel. There's a lot to it. And then of course there's making sure that it makes sense from a cost perspective. At what point do we cost recover another 4, another 6, another 8 spots? There is a report that's coming this year, in regards to the maintenance on the slips. I think that's an important one to speak to when you have to be doing some repairs anyway. So that might be a time to look at it even more closely. But it has been discussed and it is a possibility. Having a waiting list isn't the worst thing in the world.
No, absolutely. Just follow up. Thank you. No, thanks for that information because I've had several people come to me asking me, how I can get a slip and whether I can get them to slip sooner. And obviously we can't do that.
No.
But, I think, putting new infrastructure in there could be done on a cost recovery basis. I think people that want their boat there will pay what they have to pay to get that service and that hookup while they're there. So, we're trying to really promote economic development in the municipality. you know, we want people to come to places where we can provide dockage for them. I know I won't vote down because I don't know that I'm gonna have a place to put the boat when I get there. And so that's a bit of a challenge right now. So I think with our new economic development department for the county, hopefully work together with them around a plan to try and enhance the marina and, you know, make it a more welcoming place. It's a great place now. But I think adding some slips, I think will go a long way to making it a better place for sure. Thanks.
Angela.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of add that we were able to actually enter into an agreement, licensing agreement or license of occupation agreement with Parks Canada last year for that wharf space along by the old blue building, as we all know it, at the end of Smith Street. We were a little bit late to the game because we had to get Severn Waterway to get the cleats reinstalled, which didn't happen until August. So the good thing is cleats are there. We've reached out again to renew that lease. And I think that would be a really great opportunity for us to promote as part of the marina operations for transient use. A lot of those boats maybe don't need services. It's a good place to tie up. And it's also in a great spot because it's downtown. So the boaters can actually see the downtown and what's available. We've got La Boat on the system. And they're looking for those kind of spaces. And we also, we did meet recently with the new Peterborough County tourism staff, mentioned that that is an area we want them to promote, and as well as the campground and our own marina. So I think there's a way for us to that's not going to cost us anything other than maybe a little bit of grass cutting. I know the building isn't the most attractive, but it's better than nothing. That's true.
Councillor Boyko.
Thank you. One comment and then another question for Lane. Yeah, Mike and I had long conversations a couple of years ago about the boat slip list, the waiting list, and the list was cleaned up. And Mike did a really good job in making sure that the people who are no longer living in the area, no longer on a boat, a couple of people had died, were still on the list. So that list really was cleaned up a couple of years ago, but it still remains an issue for a number of people who want to get their boat there. We have a supply and demand issue. I have a question for Lane, and it's not going to affect the amount of taxes, but it's simply a question with respect to reflecting the true costs of departments. I go to Department 40 and it says Parks and Public Spaces and it says expenditures, and it's the manager's wages are 100% in the Parks and Public Spaces. That's fine. That's Mike, I assume, that we're talking about. But Mike does so much more with the facilities. For example, the old post office, all of the hours that he put into there, and yet it would look like that is still a Parks and Recreation expense where it's not really. And then I flip over to festivals. And when I look at the festival page, Department 41, it says expenses, salaries and wages, 0. And where Mike and Amy are attending the meetings of the Jazz and Art Festival and the Shamrock Festival and the Polar Festival, working so long all year long, helping to set those 3 festivals up. And then on the weekends, my God, the hours that are put in not only by Mike and Amy, but a great number of other staff. And yet it says no salaries and wages are allocated to that. So does that mean that we are not getting a true picture of what the Parks and Recreation budget truly is because the wages are all put there? And does it mean we are not getting a true picture of what the festivals cost the township to put on because the wages are not being allocated there?
Sure, thanks for that question. The issue of allocating administrative and supervisory expenses is always something that comes up, and we're challenged with that in general government as well. With respect to Mike's involvement with, say, old post office or some of those things, definitely his wage all stays in 40 as a Parks and Public Space, but the facilities coordinator full wage goes to Department 6. So in terms of that aspect of it, that's how we kind of looked at allocating costs there. So the facilities coordinator role, if the full cost goes to Department 6. With respect to 41, we do have the staff allocate time to festivals on their time card. We don't budget taxation in that department because we really don't know on an ongoing basis. But at the end of the year, I move tax from Department 40 over to 41, so that balances to zero. So we don't budget in that area, but it's basically park staff that do work there. I just had a recent conversation with Mike about that, and there is some work, Polar Fest in particular, with public works staff, right? So they do charge to Department 41, but then we just slide taxation dollars over to make sure it balances to zero. Yeah, the idea of actually budgeting tax dollars in Department 41, probably has merit in terms of the discussion of how that should be. I think it needs to be a bigger discussion probably with respect to administration and how that gets allocated out. A good example, like we always ensure that anything to do with water and sewer, that Adam's time, my time, Janice's time, and Erica's time is allocated to water and sewer, so there's no cross subsidization there. And our billing individual, Rain upstairs, she's 50-50 between water and sewer, but then of course she supports in front counter as well, right? What that doesn't capture, for instance, would be our payroll coordinator, our IT coordinator and supervisor, those types of things. So yeah, we haven't really come up with a good way of allocating all that out to not, like, we don't want to spend so much time on the process of doing it that it costs us time.
No,
Right, you know, that type of thing. But yeah, it was kind of a saw off in terms of Mike and Amy being charged to Department 40. I would think maybe 10 years ago, we might have did an allocation a little bit differently. We tried to just put admin all in the more or less the home cost center. And then, for instance, the supervisor is split between all the facilities. The staff that are working in those facilities, they may be charged directly to an arena if they're there, or then out to the park. So it's that hands-on work that we're capturing really well. But the administrative or oversight role, yeah, we just have home cost centers, basically.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, just move on to our last department. I'm not going to speak about Department 50. We don't, but I can answer any questions. We don't have any tax impact there. But Department 44, library services. This is the final year of what has been a multi-year phase-in of staffing hours to move all of the existing staff over there to full-time hours. And then we have now one part-time staff person as well. As council will recall, the library staff and CEO worked together to present to the board that they would delay any phase into full-time hours and equivalent benefits that would be paid until July 1st last year. So this just is the final phase in of that. So the last 6 months of the full year. So that's primarily the reason for this year's tax increase. So a decision that's kind of been made over the last few years, and this just kind of finalizes that. I think an important point, this is the only municipal service that relies extensively on non-paid volunteers. So all the volunteers that we see at the desk are doing different work behind the scenes, or they're behind the scenes when the library isn't even open. They're non-paid hours for those volunteers. I think the number is something like, if you include the stores, it's something like 14,000 hours that they put in at the branches and the stores. Sarah's did a bit of a wage calculation from using library technicians in Ontario. So that would just be for the library volunteers, and that's in excess of $330,000 is what the impact is in terms of real dollars. So an amazing number, really. We have been hearing for years that our volunteer model is going to experience challenges and not be sustainable. And for, I would think, probably a decade or two, we've been able to kind of push that aside and say, no, we're still going strong. We're still going strong. And then really since the pandemic, we're starting to see some cracks kind of in our model. And so those concerns have been brought to light. That's part of the reason to go to full-time staffing hours for the staff that we actually had. But I think good news for the library board and for council is that there is a new strategic plan being developed in 2025. So it's kind of an opportunity to review what's going well and what challenges that we're going to be experiencing in the years ahead. And I would wouldn't be surprised if there are some recommendations in that strategic plan to address the volunteer model challenges and how we're doing that. So I'm not sure Sarah had anything to add, but I know from my perspective of being involved with the library and being involved with the board over the years, when you get to a point of a strategic plan, that's always it's a challenge, but it's also a point of renewal and a new looking ahead and new challenges, but new opportunities as well. So you had anything to, oh, Sarah's over here just nodding her head, so that's cool.
Sharon, thank you. Sorry. Yes, thank you. And my question is through you to Sarah. And I want to first say how much I appreciate the fact that the library and library board is working so hard with all the fundraising. The fundraising is a success story, I think, $24,000. And the question I have goes directly to what Lane was saying, because the volunteers are going to be affecting the future of the library. They're going to be affecting the future of a number of organizations that are going on for things that we celebrate in Selwyn. I just talked about the festivals. The festivals wouldn't work without volunteers. The beautification of the plantings that wouldn't work without volunteers. So what could you tell us about the volunteers? What are you seeing? What trends are you seeing right now, as opposed to when we first talked about this several months ago? And what can be done to try to attract and retain volunteers?
I think we're still seeing a lot of rely on volunteers to a schedule shift. I think it's more project-based proceeding, and it's like with that people's ability to commit to something other volunteer commitments or just travel. So I think we're still seeing a lot of the challenges that we have before. In terms of how we're mitigating it, I think that's something that we're going to really explore in the strategic plan. How we do mitigate that. We have this best to shorten the shift. It's tricky for us to go to a project-based model because we do rely on them for the strength of operations. But it's exploring how we can make it. Yeah. How it's changing, how it's evolving, how it's making it work.
Okay, so you are going to be taking a look at measures to, as I say, attract and retain. That's terrific, because what we saw with the increased costs of the library as a result of having to go full time, that is going to be happening in other departments if the volunteers continue to go the way they're going, and I see no reason why it will not continue. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Okay, so those are the highlights on the summary tab. I've got some more slides to go through. Obviously, we need to get to Department 11 and 12 and provide some rate information. But that's specifically how some of our projects have materialized into taxation impact. And then, as was mentioned, sometimes it's more of the effort and things that we're doing as well. A lot of good work that's being completed this year. I want to recognize, before we get into the rates, the work of the department heads. And once again, specifically Angie and Janice on the narratives and kind of weaving that all together to tell a story. And basically tells a story where we're investing time and effort in Selwyn. But I want to move on now to the rates and some discussion about that. So Orca in particular, the Selwyn portion of the levy is $267,590. That's up a little over $18,000 over 2024. That's about 7.3%, which is a fairly significant increase for Orca, but I think it reflects the realities that we're all facing. So we are still treating that as an external separate levy on our bills, just to increase transparency. And I'm not sure if there's any questions on that one, or If not, I'll carry on to policing. So the first is OPP. So there was a significant year-end adjustment that came through. We've adjusted for that. The initial increase on contract, which I think has come to council, was almost $300,000. But the province stepped in with a response for 2025 and has decreased that or brought that increase down to $77,842. So when you have impacts in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's definitely an area of concern. The province, in their response in 2025, I think was responding to municipalities' concerns across the province. And because of the fact that the OPP increases went out and then the province responded, that's an area of concern because I would have thought if there was going to be a long-term solution, then maybe the initial estimates wouldn't have went out. So that I would say based on where we know the costs are going in 2026, because of the fact that most of the OPP costs are tied to wages. This is typically the point where we would be recommending some sort of a multi-year plan to consider a phase-in to increase the cost. Because the concern is going to be that amount that the province provided for 2025, they won't provide in 2026, or it will be greatly reduced. However, in light of the challenges that we are experiencing, and also with the fact that the province has pledged to review that cost sharing arrangement and spend some more effort on that in 2025, we're just bringing it forward to council and saying that until we know where talks go and if they're going to consider that cost sharing differently, that we'll maintain our approach, which is essentially status quo. And as I mentioned, status quo just means that the area rate matches the contract rate. So that's what's being proposed for the OPP.
So Lane, would it be worthwhile having a delegation at AMO with a Solicitor General to emphasize what you just said, or should we just leave it and see?
Yeah, I think it always helps to bring the point home, and I really do think that's why the provincial government responded this time, because shortly after we started getting information from the OPP, I know that it started showing up in the newspapers across the province. And then shortly thereafter, we had 2 webinars that were scheduled to outline the increased costs and how they would trickle down. And those were canceled, told that we'll hold off until the province responds. And then the next time we got an update, the province had really stepped in and decreased the cost a lot. So I think that would help us. I think that as much as we need them to come to the table with support, really early on understanding what this new cost arrangement would be and how they would maybe come up with that would be important. So I think we could put together some notes on it.
Okay, so do you need a motion that we provide a delegation to the AMO?
I'm just wondering, I'm not sure when we would typically have to make that request. I think some of it will depend on the level of information that we have available to us. Like if they start doing the review of the billing model early on and we actually could make some specific comment to any potential changes, that would probably be really helpful as well. So we might just want to wait a little bit until we actually have to make the request.
Yeah, we always put the, as soon as AMO opens up the delegation request, we have it on the agenda. So I think between all of us, there will be at least one person who will remember to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because in conversations with our then MPP, because he's now running an election, when, he was kind of puffy chest, oh, look what we've done, we clawed back and you're not going to have to pay that. And we said, what about next year? And it was blank. So, yeah. A phase in would be good.
Yeah, so we definitely would, I would say in the past with some of our other concerns, we were concerned that the UMP funding was going to be reduced at one point in time. There's another annexation when we knew annexation was happening and we were losing assessment to the city, those types of things. We put in some phase-in plans, and this would be the year and I know Janice and I actually talked to you about it and had a what I think was a good plan to bring it in. And then we just decided, you know what, a lot of challenges this year, and we really don't know what this new model would be. So let's just, be aware, make sure council's aware, and then move forward. So. Over to Lakefield and the police costs there. So once again, we are operating under contract there as well. Schedule that we've received there is a little over 700,000. As council would be aware, there was a delay in the city budget approval, just a recent approval this week. So I will be reaching out to verify before we bill for taxation that the schedule hasn't changed. Because I do know that was based on some figures earlier on, and I don't know if the police services board responded to the level that the finance staff at the city thought they were going to. So I need to verify that. At this point, we've just ensured once again that our approach is the same, that whatever the contract is, that's what the area rate is, providing that. So there will be an area rate increase there as well.
I've got a question from Councillor Henry.
Thanks for this, Lane. I'm just curious, does little old Selwyn need two police forces policing us, and would there be cost savings to it if, I don't know if we can negotiate with them who takes on the contract, but obviously eliminating one, and does that at least lower administration costs and possibly duplicated costs between the two organizations?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's definitely that's a community-wide impact for sure. That it's not something that you're going to see staff input or recommending, I don't think, for sure. I think that would have to be a grassroots movement if that was going to happen, or direction from council. I've been through that before in my career for sure. So yeah, at this point in time, we're not hearing concerns from I would say the higher priced police service, right? The area rate, which is higher. But yeah, then if that was something in terms of a council direction, or if a community led initiative that came to council, then for sure that's the type of thing we'd wade into for sure.
Follow up there. I seem to poke bears every so often around here. Is that one that I'm poking right now, possibly?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
If I could, through the mayor, this came from, this came from before amalgamation, and when Lakefield actually had its own police department. And I was on council at the time when we realized that was simply unsustainable. We couldn't have our own police department anymore. And so a long process, it took over a year of consultations with the public and negotiations with the OPP and the city. And the final decision was made that in an urban setting such as Lakefield, the city was the better option to go to. And so therefore, when the amalgamation happened, that simply continued. At one point, the only way it was allowed was it became the Peterborough Lakefield Police Service. Now, a mayor of Peterborough ended that, but that's where it all came from. And I hear a number of things as the Lakefield Ward Councillor. Never once have heard anyone say we should get rid of the Peterborough and go to OPP.
Deputy Mayor Black.
Yeah, I'll poke the bear a little bit too, just to give you a bit of a break. Yeah. As Lane said, he remembers that. I certainly remembered. I chaired the police board at the time that all happened, or the police and fire committee was together or something back in those days. But anyways, I sat as a much younger person in the middle of a room full of people that definitely had an opinion at the time that they wanted the Peterborough Police, and it was a bit of a different time with the amalgamations and Lakefield considering merging with Peterborough and all this other thing. So there's many other political factors, I guess, is what I'm saying, back 25 years ago, 26 years ago now, 27 years ago, maybe now. Yeah, it was a long time ago. And yeah, so I think it's worth revisiting again. It is certainly a public, an issue that would have to be brought to public. The contract is coming up next year, 26. Let's see in the report, it's 20, the end of this year, we got.
Yeah, so the agreement with the city of Peterborough is up for renewal at the end of this year.
End of 2025,
Yeah.
so we will have to discuss that at council at some point. I know the OPP is looking to put a new detachment in Peterborough County, which might be a factor as well. Anyway, there's a, I think it's already been said, it was a bit of a political issue back 27 years ago. I'm not sure it's as much a political issue today.
Why would you say that?
Well, it's
Yeah.
definitely have to look at it,
Yeah.
and go from there, so.
Yeah.
So it begins.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on now and just take a look at how this all translates into impact on typical homeowner, and then I have an additional section about rates in particular. So the caveat here is that because there's no CVA changes, no reassessment, then our annual homeowner is still valued the same as they were valued the year before. So the typical homeowner is valued at a little over $314,000. When we apply all of this, our general municipal increase is 54.48, and that's across the board in Selwyn. That's that increase. It translates into a tax rate increase of 6.75%. The OPP area rate goes up 377, or an increase of 1.83%. And then overall, the municipal rural is $58.26, an increase of 5.75%. When we look at
Can
this,
we just break that down to how much that would be a month? Divide by 12,
yeah,
488
yeah.
a month increase.
Yeah, so actually, you're one slide ahead of me, so that's
Oh,
good, yeah.
have that? I didn't have that slide.
Well, no, I've got some speaking notes here to
Okay.
speak to that, but that's exactly right. If we look over into the village, same municipal increase, definitely the police increase there is more at 2.44%. And so the municipal ratepayer with the same house would be paying $66.85 more.
And that equates to $5.58 a month increase
Right.
in Lakeville.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Over the years, I've presented different ways of looking at it. My favorite, and maybe it's just because of all the coffee that I've drank, is because I like to look at a Tim Hortons coffee. So like, what's a Tim Hortons coffee per week, that type of thing. That'd be the obvious one. Another one that's near and dear to my heart is the price of gas and filling up the truck. So that's about part of a tank of gas, part of half a tank of gas once. Yeah.
For the year.
Yeah.
For the year.
So the yearly increase is half of a tank of gas.
Yeah.
So there's been an interesting approach used by some municipalities lately, and it does get into this amount per month. So I would just caution council as well that sometimes the cost per month is the cost per 100,000 of assessment per month.
But
So,
not with us.
right, so if we were to look at the city, for instance, I know that a lot of the press has been around the cost per month per 100,000 of assessment. So you just need to make sure we're comparing apples to apples with them. So I got a little bit more about our Selwyn rate comparison, but I'll just leave it there for now in case there's questions.
Deputy Mayor Black.
Thank you through Mayor Senes. Yeah, thanks for the numbers. What percentage of the overall tax bill is the Selwyn tax levy? Because it's, you're saying 58 and 66, but I think we're the smallest part of the total tax bill that our residents get, right?
Yeah, so there'll be no increase in education this year because it will be static. So there's no increase there. Whenever there isn't a reassessment, then that rate stays the same. Last year we made up about 37% of the tax bill. So, and the county was 46%.
37 and 46.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
So this would typically be where I would end the presentation of the budget. And and I'd entertain any questions, but we're aware that the rate this year and a new component, being the capital levy, is a significant ask. So I want to provide some additional information to council. And what comes up quite often is just how do we compare across the county? But I do want to just emphasize the presentation and how we approach our budgets is to say, what is the Selwyn experience when we're establishing this budget? So what are we experiencing here? Why do we need to increase taxes? What is the justification for doing so? And what are the guiding principles that we use? And I'll touch on those later on. Obviously, we are a service organization, and so human resources has a big impact on us. That's been maintained in our budget. Inflationary impacts, which are experienced by everybody, and not only are other comparable municipalities, other municipalities in the county, but our ratepayers as well. But we're not immune to those costs as well. So when we talk about inflationary impacts, we're experiencing them as well. And then we also need to have new funding in place for capital and preparing for replacements. So while folks may have a cost of living increase in their pension and they may have inflationary impacts, not too many of our ratepayers need to worry about buying a new fire truck or need to buy a new plow truck. So we're experiencing large increases in those areas. And so we need to have new funding in place for that capital. So that's how we approach the budgets. That's what Janice and I have brought to the budget for the last several decades. But we also have this other additional goal based on council expectations, which I understand and appreciate, which is to be the lowest rate in the county. Part of that is because of our size and our assessment base and the fact that we can be the lowest rate in the county, and we have been the lowest rate in the county. It provides a competitive advantage for new builds. And so when Angie and her economic development department, Robert and his staff in building and planning are speaking to folks, they have a competitive advantage. I've said to many ratepayers that are complaining about something or have a concern about something, it finally gets down to a point, well, I guess I'll have to go somewhere else. And I basically point out to them that same house anywhere else in the county of Peterborough, and you're going to pay more taxes and you may not get the same level of service. That's always presented in a polite way. It's informative. There it is, but that's the facts, right? So I understand competitive advantage. I understand why that would be important to council.
I brag about it all the time.
So it's a good goal to have, and it's something that we are cognizant of for sure. It also positions us well, though, to consider when we need to add additional funds to the budget, because we already know we're the lowest tax rate. And so when we bring something forward like a tax rate levy for capital, then we know, okay, we have some capacity there to be able to do that. And especially when we're looking at our township owned assets. So I want to provide another chart and a graph because I love doing those. So in 2024, we have had this in development for a while. We built an in-house analysis of just where the rates are across the county. And these rates are readily available on an online portal, which we all used to use more extensively. It's called Opta, but it outlines where the rates are. And all of these have been vetted with all the other municipalities, so we know that they're accurate. And I really wanted to thank Erica for her work in my department. I kind of tasked Erica with an idea, and she put together an Excel sheet and then took a bunch of my random ideas and continued to improve it. So I've got a really great template to run scenarios and to generate this graph. So these are the confirmed rates for 2024. Ours are in the two different colors. So the lowest one being the rural rate and the fourth one over being our village rate. The two closest ones to us would be, in terms of our closest comparators, are the northern municipalities, being Trent Lakes and North Kawartha, who don't provide necessarily the same level of service that we need to provide either, right? So we need to keep that in mind. And I would say our more obvious competitors in terms of tax rate and things like that are at the much higher end of the graph when you start looking at Cavan, Monaghan, Havelock, and Autonomy South Monaghan. So you start to see where we are. So different impacts, different service levels, different challenges. And as I mentioned last year, every treasurer in the county that would approach their budget, if they approach it the same way that we do, they all have these same challenges, right? And so they have to bring forward a budget to council and get it approved. But that's based on 2024.
Question.
Good question.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. So what does the 0.35, what, I don't understand what
Yeah.
the left margin is here.
Yeah, so those are tax rates. So if you looked at the actual residential tax rate, those are what the rates would be for the municipal charge. And in this, and I should make that point, municipal only means municipal, OPP or Peterborough Police and Orca.
Right.
So these are all comparable rates. It doesn't include the county and it doesn't include education. Because I have no control over those.
So that's 3.5%, 4.5%, 4%.
That's what our tax rate would be, yeah.
Okay, so you got it as
Yeah.
0.2. But so 0.20 is 2%.
Yeah, so they have to be displayed in a certain way on this, so they need
Okay,
to be
yeah,
at six,
just-
yeah, or
just
6
clear.
decimal points, that type of thing, yeah.
Okay.
So that's the 2024 rates, which we know. So then using that template, we started to take a look at, well, how would our new rate affect that? So we had to obviously make some assumptions. And so I tried to make everything comparable. So first off, I assumed that everybody would increase their tax rates by 5%. I added in our full capital levy, and then this is the result. So it still maintains our standing. Then I thought, well, okay, if I've assumed 5% because I know the pressures that everybody else is experiencing with the OPP, with inflationary pressures. But then I backed that away and I said, okay, we're going to increase ours 5% and they're going to only increase theirs 3%. And then I added our levy in. And it was still by a sizable margin, the same result. I went so far as to say that they freeze their tax rates this year and we increase ours 5% and add the capital levy. And the village rate, it may switch with Daryl Dummer, but that's the only one. So other than that, and I know that Daryl Dummer's not going to freeze it tax rate this year, right? So, and when we start looking at increases, like I've mentioned, I went to 5, ours is 4.6. But if you start looking at it, there's a wide variation and we could literally add hundreds of thousands of dollars to our budget and still maintain the lowest tax rate for the rural rate.
Question, Deputy Mayor Black.
Yeah.
Thank you, through Mayor. So we're at 6.4% for 2025 in total, right? And it looks like it's at 0.4 or 4% right now.
No, so that's the tax rate. So
Right.
the rate that's on there is the tax rate, the actual rate.
Okay,
The 6.54 is the percentage increase. this
Right.
year.
okay,
So built into all of those projections is our 6.54%. And everybody else, we had to assume they were going to go up, their tax rate was going to go up as well.
Okay. That's tax rate, okay.
It's confusing. It's confusing to the public
Mhm.
because they get a percentage and it isn't really reflective of what the actual amount of increase is.
Yeah.
And the only way that a lot of people can understand is if you give them a dollar rate.
Mhm.
Your taxes are gonna go up $5.88 a month this year. They can understand that. If you live in a house that's assessed at $314,000. And I'll tell you right now, my house is assessed at less than that. The assessment rates are much lower than what the market value rates are. So for the most part, the average in Selwyn is around 314,000, correct, Lane?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we say is our typical homeowner,
Yeah.
right?
And the ones that are above that should be able to afford if they have to pay double that. $588 a month.
So the great thing for me with this tool is, and it'll come back again when we chat at the asset management discussions and when we take a look at that. And when we have confirmed rates by everybody is we can start to monitor that. The other caveat in that is that when other municipalities on that scales are talking about a percentage increase, so if they're increasing 4%, they're increasing 4% of a much higher rate already, right? So when we're the lowest one, and if we did the same, their rate would go up higher than ours, right? Because as their rate is higher and you apply that percentage increase, then it goes up higher, right?
So I guess the question is, we haven't voted on this yet, but if we were to accept everything that you've given us today, how do we present this to the public where, you know, they don't go ballistic and say, oh, you've gone up that much, when really dollar wise, it is not significant.
Right.
How do we advertise that?
Yeah. So it's, I think generally this last summary slide, what we're trying to say here is that everybody that I speak to in depth about the budget process, and if I have ratepayers that really want to know our approach, we go through these principles. I talk about slow and steady growth, the fact that we're maintaining service levels, we're not increasing or decreasing service levels. There's a lot of short-term challenges, but we're addressing those. And I think some of our recommendations in the budget are proactive. They're not necessarily what you would call innovative or, you know, but they're proactive recommendations. We've pointed out a number of areas as concern for future years, but we haven't hit the budget really hard with that. And in some areas we've said we haven't hit it at all, but we've got to be prepared for it. We know that core equipment like fire trucks and plow trucks are going up in price, so we've got to address that. And we know that there's core assets that need to have those reserves. And we did all of those things, which I would say are what the principles that we've addressed in the budget for years now. And then we've still been able to establish an attractive tax rate. I think that somehow, if council can look at that slide and put it into your own words, then that's really what a ratepayer should look at, right? But anyway, that kind of wraps up the formal comments, and we'd be open to any other questions.
Questions? Councillor Henry.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Senes. Thank you, Lane. And thanks for that last slide that kind of articulates it for us. As we are discussing succession planning and changes in the coming years, how do we articulate this to new hires coming on and make sure they go aligned with the township's thinking and practices?
Yeah, so that is definitely one of the things where we looked at that succession planning in the screen that we talked about. And so our goal and our policy is outlined that if anybody who has achieved certain levels of service provides advance notice of 6 months, then there's incentive for them to do that. And then we try to have overlap so that it's not just a 2-week overlap or somebody's on their way out the door and somebody else is coming in. So if we can build in some type of overlap of, you know, a couple of months for training, those types of things. I will say that I think all the departments, but I know it's the staff in my department are really working hard on manuals, and the manuals nowadays are not just a lot of text, right? They're screenshots, and a screenshot with a certain arrow pointing at a certain spot. Like they can do amazing things now. And so they're putting together really good training manuals. And yeah, there's just that ability to have time with the individual and chat with them. And then what we did with at least one staff in my department, I'm not sure if there's anybody else, but with Scott, when he retired, we had him back under contract for a period of time. And he was available always to talk to the new individual or new hire. And so that's part of that succession planning is also putting something like that in place as well. So yeah, it's trying to pass along that corporate knowledge to say this works well and so on, and how do we continue it?
Questions? Deputy Mayor Black.
Thank you, through Mayor Senes. Thanks again for all the hard work on the budget. We know how hard it is and how long it takes to get through. And I think you've done a great analysis of individual departments and tried to tweak as many things as possible. My concern is the rate is relatively high. I don't particularly look at the dollars per household or that sort of thing. I just look at the rate increase 1 year over year. It adds to the previous year. Mayor Duro-Dummer, Mayor Watson, I saw a post from her last night saying that they've had their initial meeting. They're coming in around 4 or under 4. Gavin Monaghan is the same way. They're I think like the 3.6, 3.7 range for their rate increases. And I'm not saying we compare. I think you've made a good slide. There's different costs out there for each municipality, and we are very fortunate that we have a large municipality compared to most of them in Peterborough County, so we have those efficiencies that are out there. So I've spent a lot of time looking through the budget, and I sent you a couple of pages of questions to help me get again a better understanding of where the opportunities might be, where we can find some cost savings within the budget. We don't know what's going to happen over 2025 with everything that's happening south of the border. I believe it's going to have a huge impact on businesses and employment rates and costs for a lot of people that are struggling out there. So I would like to see the budget come in under 5%. I still think, you know, at 6.5, that's 3.5 times the current rate of inflation. And I know a lot of that has to do with enhancements for employee salaries and those sorts of things that have been talked about in the past, which is a significant part of that number this year. I really would like to see it come in under 5% if we can. I think that equates to about $130,000 that we would need to find in the budget somewhere. I think I've talked about, I'm not going to tell staff where that would be, but we've talked a bit about reserves and the levy and those sorts of things. In the total budget, it's not a lot of dollars, but I think coming in closer to some of our other neighboring municipalities, I think would be a good approach. So I would like to see it come in under 5% if we can.
Do you have a seconder to that motion? Councillor
And if
Boyko?
I could comment, I agree that it should come in under 5. What I am looking at too, and Deputy Mayor Black alluded to this, is that we are in for uncertain times, and we are already in a situation where many people are having a hard time meeting household expenses. Something that Lane talked about was that there are more arrears. Well, that's a sign that people are having trouble making ends meet. Whatever we can do to help the cost of living, which is the biggest issue that we are facing right now, I think, and the tariffs threats have just made this more clear. We are looking at a restructuring of our entire economy, no matter what happens with the tariffs, because there will be a reaction to them that we're seeing. So whatever we can do to help the people of Selwyn to meet the economic challenges that are ahead in this restructuring that'll come no matter what happens with the tariffs, I think it's something that we should do. So what I would like to do is to, yes, not pass the recommendation that is here, but what I would do is pull out the third paragraph of it and pass separately that council endorses the application for the Active Transportation Fund grant. Pull that out, pass that. But then by seconding this motion, say, I would like staff to go back and find the funds that are necessary in order that the rate increase is only less than 5%. And the addition of $75,000 to the CIP, there's an easy find, and there's nearly half. So with that, I second the motion.
All right, I will ask if there's anything else that people have to say. I think that we go down a slippery slope when we start comparing ourselves to other municipalities with their tax rates, because we're comparing apples to oranges, and you shouldn't do that. We all have different levels of service. We have the best, I think, level of service in the county for all of our residents. And I think that there is a cost to that. I also feel that this is an excellent budget, Lane. I thank you for everything that, your department has done, and the rest of management and staff that have put the time into it. And I won't support the motion, and I'm going to pass it on to my other colleagues if they have anything to say, or I'll just call the vote.
Through you. So I really struggle with how we're actually I don't think it's actually smart financial stewardship if we try to draw from reserves that we've been told we don't have and we need to build up.
Sir,
But you're,
it's not an
Can I-
argument.
but we, like you're saying, if we're trying to take a break somehow, like as a ratepayer, like taking off my municipal hat, I can't afford a larger jump in the next 2 to 5 years. Right? Like that scares me. That scares me for being like a mortgage holder. It scares me having kids that I have to put through school. A lot of us are food insecure. So like I'm getting upset because I'm like, that's just a dumb idea. So I'll leave it there.
Councillor Henry.
Clarify. Thank you, through you, Mayor Sanis. When I was growing up, we were all going to die from acid rain. It didn't happen. Then there was a hole in the ozone. It didn't happen. And COVID came along and we were all going to die, and we're still here. And I still see COVID written all over everything as the excuse as to why things are bad or we're trying to bounce back from it. Now I think we're getting a little reactionary to Donald Trump here. By all means, the man is a lunatic and a threat to general society. But I think we need to hold steady. The man does cave. And I think, yes, times are tough. I've got kids. I got 4 of them. Lots of things going on in my life too. I work for Colleges Ontario. Colleges are shutting down everywhere. I think we should hold steady and keep reserves, because if it is going to be the nightmare that we are predicting it's going to be, we might want those reserves a year or 2 down the road from now to be able to draw upon. So I cannot support this motion.
Councillor Boyko.
Two comments based on what was just said. One, Mayor Sanis, you said we shouldn't be comparing to others. Well, we just examined a couple of slides in which we were compared to others, and you said you like to brag about comparing us to others. So I don't think by this motion, we are comparing it to others. What we are saying is we would like to serve the taxpayers of Selwyn better by lowering the rate of increase. And I don't think by saying that we need to lower the rate of increase to below 5%, we are saying let's raid reserves. That's not what we're saying at all. For example, the CIP that I reference is $75,000 being put toward a budget line, and there's already a reserve of $300,000 there. All I'm saying and I use this just as an example, I'm not saying get rid of the $300,000 reserve. I'm not saying get rid of any reserves. I'm not saying deplete any reserves. Take $75,000 out, there's $75,000 saved. And what I'm saying is there will be other savings that staff could identify without raiding reserves. So that comments on both the comments that the mayor said. And
All right.
I say that respectfully, because we all have opinions that need to be respected. So I say that respectfully.
Yeah. And I just want to comment on my comment about comparing. Ron used the example of other townships and their tax rates, and that's where my comment came from, comparing. I don't think we should be doing that. No. Yes.
I might draw on staff for this, but at the very beginning, we outlined that there's 6 areas where there was asks from staff that we can't even touch with this rate. So we're already not attending to things that we need to attend to. Is that correct? You said there were like 6 bullet points and there was 4 that were approved.
Yeah, I think the slide you're talking about, there's 6, there used to be 4, now there's 6 at the top. Yeah. And so one of them, say, public works equipment, for sure. There's in excess of $300,000 of reserve contribution required to be able to fund our equipment over the next 10 years.
Like these decisions, sorry to cut you off, they're being made for today and this year, but the implications are over multiple years and over multiple councils. Like we have to be cognizant of that. So that's where my spout off about looking at reserves and drawing from that wasn't just in the moment of this decision, it's of the long term. Leave it there. Thanks, Lane.
Henry.
Thank you, through you. Being relatively new to council, got a couple of years under my belt now. I'm always amazed how we end up at this point and we question things that we have approved throughout the year, and then today we decide to contest them. And I find that very challenging sometimes. We've approved P60 there a couple months back. I know there were some concerns about that, but if we've already approved it, then we have to move forward. And there are things in the budget that we have to accept because the Lane and the township staff are brilliant at keeping us updated of what's coming. And their favorite saying, I think, is, as you will remember, because we all forget.
Deputy Mayor Black.
Yeah, through your Mayor Sennis, I'm glad you brought up the P50 thing. So council didn't approve that. It was approved that would come to budget as part of budget. So that wasn't approved. If we were
It
approving
was
this,
approved. It was approved.
it was approved to be put in the budget. The
Mm.
budget is not approved, Mayor.
Yes,
The
it
budget-
was a P60 was approved and it's implemented already. It was put into effect as of October the 1st of last year, Ron.
So how could we approve that in camera?
You didn't, you rose from closed session
Yes,
and passed a resolution and it was in the minutes.
as we
I'll have
always
to look
do.
at that. That's contributing a huge amount of dollars this year.
But it has been approved by council and
I'd like to see the
implemented.
motion. I don't remember doing that, but
Well, I'm sure staff can get it for you, but yes, we did. I remember it. Do you? Yeah.
No.
Yeah, we all remember it, Ron.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm gonna call the vote if everyone has finished speaking about the motion that's before us. And if you want, we can have a recorded
I'll
vote.
have a recorded vote. please.
Okay. She's going to.
Okay, so the recorded vote, we're going to start with,
No, no, she's asking for the motion to be read.
oh, sorry. Well, it was a little bit all
Yeah.
over the place, to be honest with you.
I know.
But essentially Lane's recommendation, the notion was to pull the active transportation fund from the resolution. And the overall message was that staff come back with a review of the budget that would have the tax increase be under 5%.
Yes.
Sorry, I can't do two things at once, apparently. Thanks. Counselor Kulis?
I don't support.
So,
No, there.
no,
No, correct.
thank you.
No.
That's okay. Counselor Henry? Mayor Sennis?
No.
Deputy Mayor Black?
Yes.
Counselor Boyko?
Yes.
Motion is lost.
All right, so we have a recommendation before us. Lane, can you put that up on the,
Sure. Yeah, so that's most of it. And then it goes over onto the second page as well.
okay, it's on a slide here. Report of the Manager of Financial Services regarding the taxation budget 2025 draft final be received for information. Council endorses submission of an application to the Active Transportation Fund for the development of the pedestrian corridor as part of the Ward Street Enhancement Project that would include a multi-purpose pathway, sidewalk, amenities such as benches, garbage and recycling containers, bike racks, etc. Council support the allocation of unused CIP program funding to a new CIP Public Realm Reserve effective 2024 and as presented in 2025 taxation budget narrative for Department Number 7, and staff bring forward a report for council to consider activating the building improvement grant and the residential grant as new financial incentive programs in accordance with the approved CIP, and that council supports the adoption of the 2025 taxation budget based on the final draft budget package as presented and discussed, inclusive of the updated capital project narrative on February the 6th, 2025, and that the Manager of Financial Services prepare a PSAB compliance report for the February 25th, 2025 meeting of council for the formal adoption of the 2025 taxation and area rate budget, and ask for a recorded vote.
I think we need a mover and a seconder.
Moved by Councillor Henry, seconded by Councillor Kulis.
Very good. Thank you. Counselor Henry? Mayor Senes?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Black? Counselor Boyko?
No.
Counselor Kulis? Motion is carried.
Thank you. Just lucky. You're just lucky. All right, thank you. Now we will move to other new and unfinished business. Madam Clerk.
Yes, we just wanted to get this special meeting scheduled for the public meeting for Triple T. That will allow us to get the notice out for the 20-day notice of compliance.
Someone move it. Counselor Henry, seconded by Counselor
Oh,
Boyko.
can I ask a question? Will it be held here
Yes,
in this room? Okay.
yes,
And it'll be publicized through the regular ways we publicize it.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Did you second it? Yeah. All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. And we have a bylaw, the confirming bylaw. Moved by Counselor Henry, seconded by Counselor Boyko. All in favor? It's carried. And a move to adjourn. Counselor Henry, Deputy Mayor Black, all in favor? It's carried. Thank you.